call the meeting to order. This is the special meeting of the Board of Education. Then we'll be able to Skype in as well at that point. So technology has to be shifted to be able to have his voice present.
And Ms. Green. So
You're
we
present.
do have a quorum.
Thank you. All right, moving to public comments. Thank you. Our speaker tonight is Jolia Hill, and we will do 3 minutes per individual tonight. Good evening.
My name is Julia Hill. I reside at 26488 Old Homestead Drive. I come before the Farmington Public School Board today as a resident and as a parent of 3 young girls in our public school system. One is at Hillside, where Miss Green was her principal before she retired, and then 2 are currently at East Middle School. My husband and I made a conscious decision to move to Farmington Hills because we wanted to raise our children, our girls, in a community full of diversity and experiences that emulate the real world. We wanted our children to have access to one of the best public school systems in southeastern Michigan, and we remain in our great community today because of those reasons. I'm here today because I felt a sense of responsibility as a community member and an educator with experience in Chicago Public Schools, Southfield Public Schools, and I currently work at Wayne Risa, the Intermediate School District for Wayne County, to provide insight on one of the finalists for superintendency, Dr. Serena Shivers. Dr. Shivers was my direct supervisor when I worked for Southfield Public Schools as the supervisor of state and federal programs. I was responsible for developing and implementing and supervising supplemental programs to meet the needs of our most at-risk students. And those are kids who receive Title I supports, 31A at-risk supports, homeless, and foster care students in the foster care system. This task was not easy, as you can imagine, but through the support and guidance of Dr. Shivers, I was able to think outside the box, bring in community members with expertise to develop innovative programs that met the needs of our students, professionally developed staff, and supported parents in the hardest job on earth, being a parent. Dr. Shivers was a thought partner and a versatile leader that knew the right questions to ask in order to help me guarantee that I met some successful outcomes or supported kids in successful outcomes. Through her support and guidance, I was able to, like I said, think outside of the box. If I needed support, she was there to support me. If I needed direction or redirection, she was there to provide it. She was always the one to ask, does this program that you are supporting or that you are requesting that we implement, does it keep students first? Does it always meet the needs of students? And that was the question that she always asked. Lessons learned under her leadership provided me the opportunity to work at the county level where I work now. I currently support the state and federal program specialists or administrators in our 33 districts and over 100 charter schools in the county. And so I still have the opportunity to work with Dr. Shivers. She still continues to be a thought partner. Right now, we consider her a leader in many initiatives in Wayne County that include middle college, standards-based grading, and she has been instrumental in supporting me in developing a truancy pilot program for the county, and I thank her for that. So as an educator, we're always asked to look at data and to make decisions using those data points, and I hope tonight that you will consider my public comment as one of the data points that you will use in making one of the hardest decisions that's coming your way, finding our community a new superintendent of schools. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Beth Hewlett, agenda comments. 3 minutes.
Good evening. My name is Beth Hewlett. I'm a parent in the district. I want to thank you for your hard work and the endless hours that you've put into the search with such care. On the agenda that I saw online, I saw one opportunity for public comment, which is right now. And I'd like to respectfully request that you consider adding a public comment to the end after we've had a chance to listen to the presentations and the conversations from the candidates in the event that someone has some feedback that they'd like to provide.
Thank you.
I know we usually don't respond to public comment, but as was pointed out earlier, there are feedback forms, and we will be looking at those forms. So I fully encourage, whether you're here or online, please fill out the feedback if you have feedback to share. And I can speak for myself. I'll be reviewing it, and I think everyone else on the board will be doing that as well.
I also will go ahead and respond, only because our policy is if we need to give you a do that. So I will let you know that in setting the agenda, I did confer with MASB in placement of where public comment should be tonight, because it is a different form of what we're doing. And it was recommended that we do that before the interviews because of the public comment feedback sheets that everyone, both online and present, have the access. And the board will be reviewing every sheet. We have been doing that all day long. Everyone has, and we just received 2 more batches before we walked into the room. So I assure you, we are listening to every voice that has reached out. So along with many letters and emails throughout the week as well. So, okay. Our next public comment is Dana Bell regarding diversity and inclusion. 3 minutes.
How y'all doing? I came for the coffee. It was canceled, so I do apologize because I really wanted it to be informal, but like what you're doing. I have been a mom for over 21 years. I've been in Farmington for over a decade, and just like the other young lady that came up here and talked, me and my husband decided to move, and we bought a house here last September. So we love our life here in Farmington. We originally stayed in apartments, and what I liked about it, it reminded me of home. I'm originally from New Orleans, so I get to meet a whole bunch of different people. My family is multinational. That would take like a whole 2 hours to explain. But my son started his little educational career here. He started at Alameda, and now he's at Gill, which I love Gill. But in playing with a little classmate, someone at home, and I heard them talking as they normally do, play with their little toys, and he said, only white people are teachers. And then I was like, did I leave CNN on? What did I do? And I was like, no, I had the TV off. And I said, son, why do you think only white people are teachers, sweetie? He said, because they are. I've only had white teachers. And I said, okay, no, that's not true. I have to re-educate you. And then I go up to the school like I normally do, a volunteer, my father, my sister, my aunt. We go do whatever the teachers need. You need goldfish, we got you. You need tissue box, we got you. I don't feel like the teachers should have to ask for that. So I always chip in whenever I can because Costco is right down the street, right? And so I looked at the board, and on the board, I counted 3 people of color. And I was like, oh, wow. And then, and talking to different parents who are people of color, you know, we just walk through the world differently. And if you don't know there's a problem, you don't know how to fix it. So I'm pretty sure this is not the first time you all have heard a concern similar to this. But talking to other parents, there's been certain instances that are grimy and not nuances. And it sounds like because the children and the educators are not trained in diversity and inclusion. Because, see, you can have diversity but not have inclusion. So I was wondering, do educators here go through a diversity and inclusion program? Does it exist in Farmington? I had never seen it, not saying it doesn't. I just never seen talk about it, nothing of it in the paper. And the educators that I see, is it a concerted effort? I know you all want to pick the best candidates. That's why we're here tonight. So I was just wondering, as a concerned parent, and the world, as we know, is getting smaller. People are working from home. You're going to be able to have, you might be able to stay in Kenya and have a job here. That's how fast technology is moving. And I work in real life. I'm a mom, I'm a wife, and I work in pharmacy in real life. So I'm always dealing with different people from around the world. And it's just kind of heartbreaking to hear my son make such a comment. What was that? Was I supposed to stop?
That's your wrap up, please.
Okay, so thank you. My name is Dana Bell. If you ever want, I like good food, good people, and good conversation. So if you're ever on Alameda, come on by. I make you get your tummy full, okay? Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other public comments? Okay. Seeing none, we will move on to our first interview this evening, which is Dr. Robert Herrera. Before we begin with him, though, however, Mrs. Ozer has a few comments she would like to make.
Thank you. I'll be very brief. So just a couple of points of clarification. The first one relates to those question cards that are in the back of the room. So the last 15 minutes of each interview this evening will be dedicated to audience interview questions. And so Dr. Green and I will start collecting those 2 or 3 minutes ahead of time. We just have to review them, make sure they're legal and not redundant. Then we will hand them off to President Green to ask. So just when you see us get up, or even if you just kind of walk back, Dr. Green will be in the back of the room and I'll be in the front of the room, but we'll move around at that time so you'll know. And to board members, don't be distracted when you see us get up. We're just kind of your worker bees out there. Another point of clarification is really more than a point of clarification. It's an apology that I would like to make to the citizens of Farmington, just to say that there had been a miscommunication regarding the plan today for stakeholder engagement. So we have been incredibly intentional throughout this whole process to make sure that we scheduled ample meetings, that there was plenty of opportunity. An example of this is when your public challenged us and said they wanted to make sure that those stakeholder input forms were available online. We worked with the district. The district was fantastic in making sure that those feedback forms were online. Where we missed the mark today was doing an all-call during the public stakeholder meeting sessions that took place today. And so I'd like to apologize to the community for that, also to the Board of Education and to the staff here in central office. And I want to make it clear that's MASB's responsibility, our shortcoming, and nobody here, not the board nor the staff here in central office. So my apologies for that. That said, the plan for tonight is each of our candidates will come in. They're going to do about a 10-minute presentation. The board did receive the presentations ahead of time so that they would have the opportunity to prepare to ask, to process the information and ask questions of candidates. After the presentations and the questions about the presentations are done, then the candidates will take a seat, and then we'll have a less formal interview process than we had last time. And board members will just look to President Green for acknowledgement before asking questions, and follow-ups are encouraged. Any questions?
Do we need to be timekeepers, or
I'll be your
you'll
timekeeper.
be it? Perfect, then we're good.
Thank you.
And are these to be turned back into you, or these are ours personally?
Those are yours personally. Keep in mind, anything you take notes on during an interview process is subject to FOIA. All right?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, Dr. Herrera. Welcome. How are you? I hope you've had a wonderful day today.
It was very informative, and I learned.
Pleasure to meet you.
You as well.
We're proud of our system.
Welcome back.
Hello.
And obviously I do want to thank the board for the opportunity to come back and meet with you once again.
The mic. The mic.
Yeah, yeah, you can, do you want to, then let's do a handheld one. If you just turn that one on, or you're going to be over
That
there?
one's on,
You got
yeah.
it. Okay,
Thank you.
make sure we hear you.
Okay, is that better?
That is it.
Thank you.
Okay. I would like to thank you for the opportunity to meet with you again. It was a great day, meeting with the staff in the district and touring the buildings. Just going to solidify or confirm the things that I've heard about the district and viewed online and was, researching on my own. So the most notable thing is that I saw with the adults and the students was their enthusiasm to be in school and the adults' pride in the work and showcasing things they've done. They took a lot of ownership of the successes that you've had here, and you could see it in the way they commented about their buildings and their staff. So that's those are things that you can't really measure, but they're very noticeable as you enter the building. So great culture and obviously a commitment to success. So congratulations for establishing that. Would like to begin with a brief overview of some of the work that I've performed or led in districts. I'm not sure which.
It'll be on in a
It
moment,
should
I'm
be
sure.
on just a moment
Oh,
with your
okay.
presentation.
There it is.
There you go.
Perfect.
There we go.
Okay, so just quickly, a brief introduction about my career experiences. As I mentioned earlier, I've served as a teacher, many positions in central office, depending on the district, served as assistant superintendent, transformation specialist, assistant superintendent for transformation. Also, working in an ISD, I served as assistant superintendent for a county ISD program, and then I've held a couple superintendency positions, one in Onstead Community Schools, one for South Haven Community Schools, and also currently I'm in this unique position as the superintendent/CEO of Benton Harbor Area Schools. And certainly happy to answer any questions you have in the future regarding that role and how I came about that position. Some of the achievements I would like to note for you, and I'm actually going to look on this one because I didn't bring my glasses tonight. They make me look a little older than I am. Oh shoot, that's
You can use a handheld if that's easier for you. I'd give you my glasses, I
It's on
just
the
don't think they'll
bottom
work.
if you
Got
you
it
know I don't
there?
have my glasses to see that either.
Oh, my.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay, we back again? Thank you. I apologize for this slow start here. A couple of other accomplishments before I dig a little bit deeper into some of the achievement slides is serving the ISD. I had the opportunity to lead several county-wide initiatives, one around curriculum development, data management, some tiered intervention, MTSS, as most people believe. It's called now. There was a big focus on K-4 literacy in our district. Our countywide literacy scores were very poor at the time, and they wanted more supports and more focus on that. And then, of course, in order to bring things together, you always have to focus on the instructional leadership and your leadership capacity for program implementation. After the end of 4 years, we did note a certain amount of success in countywide initiatives. One was we had a 5% increase in the Lenawee County K-4 reading proficiency scores. So for us, that was significant over a 4-year period. We also noticed a reduction in the county special education incident rate. We had a very high incident rate in our county for special ed due to a high number of referrals and the way students were being found eligible for special education services. We were able to reduce that by 6% over a 3-year period, 4-year period. And then with the decrease in special education referrals, we noticed a 300% decrease in special education referrals. And that was due to our work with tiered intervention and providing additional supports for kids more strategically so they weren't falling behind in terms of their status on benchmark in reading. The other thing with the tiered intervention we also focused on were more social emotional behavior supports and how we were working with students in classroom environments and helping transition them and keeping them engaged and focused in the learning activities. And the county was a great experience working with the county. We shared a lot of professional time. One example of that is our regional meetings at the ISD usually was with our ancillary staff, school psychs, social workers, therapists. But when we held those meetings once a month, we brought in teams from the local districts, principals, their instructional coaches, and lead teachers and title teachers came, and we planned with them. So our group was learning how to support their reform efforts in their district, and they were looking to take a look at how their role could help. As a school psychologist, what can I do in terms of data collection for you to help with this? As a school social worker, what can we do to help with student behavioral issues that are disruptive to the class and allow the student to focus on the lesson of the day? So everybody was committed all the way from the special education staff to our school improvement facilitators to our data analysis group on how to support it just disappeared on me. On how okay. The other, one other area I'd like to mention in terms of some success in terms of increasing student achievement was the Adrian High School School Improvement Reform. In 2010, Adrian High School was identified as one of the bottom 5 percentile schools in the state, and they were required to write a transformational plan for the district. The superintendent reached out to me, though I was at the ISD at the time, and requested that I help assist with writing the transformational plan and then help administer or implement the plan in the district. We made a proposal to the ISD superintendent, and at the time the ISD superintendent hesitated on allocating my services to Adrian schools for that amount of time because, and I'm not sure if you recall, but one of the positions I held was recruited to the ISD to create a curriculum and consultation service area, and the superintendent felt that he got a lot of commitment from the local superintendents to recommit to that service area for professional development and working collaboratively with us, and he felt that politically he would be shortchanging them by allowing me to spend all my time in Adrian. So I did appreciate his position on that. I don't want to make it look like he was a deal killer here because he had valid reasons. But the issue in Adrian was so severe that the Board of Education contacted me and asked if I would just enter into an agreement with them just to provide services for Adrian public schools for at least a 2-year period and possibly 3 years. I ended up accepting the position, wrote the school improvement plan, and was awarded about $3.7 million in funding to help with our reform efforts. And we ultimately moved a 3.7 percentile building into the 91st percentile within a 2-year period. And we were also noted as a top 10 growth school in the state. So the efforts there were by the staff and their commitment and will to actually address the challenges and focus on improving our students' proficiency scores there was amazing, and it was a great experience to have the opportunity to work with them. I would also like to mention that on these, these are mostly focused on addressing achievement gaps and improving school rankings. Maybe later in the conversation, I could talk about some of the more future-focused and innovative programs we've also implemented that's allowed school districts to retain students and help to improve programming and opportunities for students that are above and beyond the core curriculum as well. So in tonight's presentation, we were requested to provide student achievement and our involvement in improving student achievement as related to the district improvement goals or the district strategic plan. So that's one of the things I'd like to share with you. We were supposed to share evidence of the impact on student achievement we had within that school district. So I've mined into the data a little bit further for you in future slides. And then we were intended to provide a summary of the school community's perceptions of our work within the district. So I've put together a couple slides for you regarding that. So with our district, our Board of Education had an existing district improvement plan. So I began my work off the existing plan. We did re-engage in a strategic planning process that was much different than the plan that was prior, although there were a lot of carryover in terms of their focus. But the final strategic plan did look much different than the initial plan in a couple areas. But the two areas that pretty much were the same were maintain and expand the quality of programming and services for all students. So the board was very intent on improving the graduation rate, increasing college enrollment in the district, committing to continuous improvement plans. There was a perception that there wasn't a lot of school improvement processes in the district. They wanted a curriculum itself, so we titled it Improving the Curriculum, but there was a void and absence of a comprehensive curriculum in the district. We also wanted to talk about the quality of instruction that students were receiving, and if there was a common philosophy or an instructional design model that we were using or focused on. We also needed to make better use of data. There were almost no data points in the district that you could take a look at when I first arrived to really get a sense of where the district was. We had standardized achievement tests, and I'm sure we could have long conversations on the purpose of those and how you can use them in the district. But in this particular case, those are really the only assessments we had to go by. And then the last but not least is we all agreed that, the most important thing with organizational effectiveness is establishing a culture, and what were we doing to increase our capacity and establish this culture of excellence, so to speak. The second goal area was to continue providing innovative programs and services. The district had taken a look at some project-based learning prior to that, but it never really took off very far. And so they wanted to come back and talk about some type of innovative program in the district that would kind of give them an identity and help bring in the community and help move the district forward. Again, the improved college enrollment was also in the area for impacting high achieving students. They were worried about the retention rates and whether our highest achieving students were actually enrolling in college. Then also implementing this project-based learning model that I talked to you about earlier. Increasing programming options for STEM. STEM became very popular when I was in South Haven. There was a push at the state level for it, and actually it was very well received by the community. So we had some chemical engineers and a lot of machine and tool and die shops that were into lean manufacturing, and so the STEM idea was a popular decision in the community, and they wanted to see that grow as well. The other thing is early college options. We were in a unique position when I first arrived where we had college our teachers were certified as college instructors, and they could provide direct instruction within our school, and students could earn college credits. When the junior colleges went through their accreditation system several years ago, many of our teachers were no longer certified to teach the college classes, so then we had to begin to transport our students to the college campus to earn those early college credits. So they wanted me to look at other programming options where our kids could still earn college credits and had access to earning college credits locally rather than having to travel distances or do those online. So that was the board's direction to me, kind of in a nutshell, in terms of their areas of high priority and what they wanted to see evidence of improvement on. I thought it was moving. So our top to bottom rankings we improved our ranking on the average of about 23.6 percentile points per building. When I came into the district, we had school at a 5 percentile, and I think our top achieving school was at about the 36th percentile. By the time we left, we were right around the rankings between the 40th percentile and the 70th percentile for our buildings. And so that was something that we noted because our board was very familiar because we were a resort community. When folks would explore, they usually go online. They would see, the My School Data Report or the Great Schools reports, and those would publish your top to bottom rankings almost on the first page. So in terms of changing the perception of the school district, our board was very sensitive to the top to bottom rankings, and they wanted to see growth in those or improvement in those areas. But we did have quite a significant amount of success in improving those rankings. Our graduation and dropout trends, when I came to the district in 2012, our graduation rate was about 85%, and we moved that up to 97% at the high school. So there was a lot of work and effort in that building to make sure those kids were going to, we were going to retain the students and get them to graduation. The dropout rates also significantly decreased, and I think that was due to a lot of social and emotional behavior supports through those tiered interventions and making sure students were successful in their academics and earning credits right at the beginning of their high school career. So between those two, again, some marked achievements and a lot of growth from our students. The curriculum reforms that we worked on between 2012 and 2018, this was a little bit more of a challenge in the district, so I have to share some background information about how this came about. When I came to South Haven, the budgeting, their financial conditions, they were struggling. They didn't really set aside any money for capital projects, and certainly there was no money allocated for curriculum. So coming into the district, it was very easy to see why there hadn't been a commitment to curriculum materials and curriculum review processes, because there was no funding for them. So in the fall of 2018, I was getting ready to put the budget together, came in and thought, okay, next year we'll make sure we run a tight ship here, and we'll allocate some money for curriculum so we can get things started. So when I started in September, we got our fourth Friday count that fall, and we lost an additional 75 students above projected. So that put made a little bit of a barrier for us to really be able to commit those financial resources. In addition, that fall audit, the district conducted their school audit very late. It typically occurred in September and October. I'm used to them occurring more towards the summer, into the summer. And in South Haven's particular case, it was late, and then the audit revealed a $320,000 shortfall from the year prior that we hadn't built into that following fiscal year's budget as well. So immediately we were about $1 million off the projection where we thought we were that year. So that made it a struggle to figure out how to bring the resources back to the teaching and learning environments. So in 13-14, I requested use of Title I funding for our curriculum. In most cases, MDE will not approve a core curriculum because it's part of the basic programming. But there were two programs that the state was pushing because they were comprehensive curriculums, which means that they had built-in Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions in them. And so through Title I, because we're school-wide programming, we were able to purchase a curriculum through Title I funds, and I did not have to utilize general fund expenditures. So we finally had our chance to get moving forward on a curriculum reform in 2014-15. So it's 14-15 we implemented our first ELA curriculum reform, K through 5. We also began to conduct a curriculum revision for math, grades 6 through 12. In 15-16 was our first year we were finally able to get our finances around and allocate funding within general fund for curriculum. And as a matter of fact, we even were able to allocate money for capital projects as well for the first time in probably 5 or 6 years in the district. In 16-17, we implemented 6 through 12 ELA, and then we went back and implemented the K through 5 math curriculums. So between the ELA and the math curriculums, by 2016-17, we had full curriculums being implemented, and we were on our way. So that was the initial struggle to find the funding to support some of the curriculum reforms that we were working on in South Haven. At the high school, we noted some I would say, very significant achievement results. In terms of high school math results on the ACT and our high school math SAT comparisons, I have a slide for you. Our overall school proficiencies on all the SAT tests, I'm going to share that with you in just a sec, and then post-secondary enrollment trends. So the very first one is our high school mathematics and our SAT scores. You can see that we actually made good growth between 15, 16, and 17, 18. Because we weren't able, with their curriculum review, we were really focused on curriculum alignment, making sure that we were exposing students to the full curriculum. And we were also taking a look at our instructional deliveries and how we were facilitating student learnings in math with lesson designs. So we had an opportunity to work with Heidi Boley, who was out of California at the time. She had worked internationally on graduate release models for math programs. She came in and worked with our staff on this. Between the curriculum alignments, creating some benchmark assessments so we could monitor students' progress through the curriculum, and working with us on certain aspects of the curriculum delivery within those lessons. Our teachers felt very confident, and they did a nice job moving the students forward on their SAT scores. The SAT scores comparison, just to give you an idea where we were in comparison with our peer group, we did move up to, we were second in our peer group, which is, for us, was very notable. When I first came to the district, we weren't at the state average in things, so we used to compare ourselves to peers. By the time we left, we were working at the state average, so then we started using more of the state average. So as you can see, the green line is actually our peer groups in the end, and that's where we used to be performing when we first came to the district. By the time we left, you can see we're just above the state average, which would be the yellow line. So significant amount of growth with our students in terms of the math and their performance there. Any questions I'm sorry, I just got moving there. 10 minutes, I got this timer on my mind. Okay. The high school overall proficiency for us was also an indication of how healthy our high school was. Our high school proficiency on all the tests that the students took in the high school ended up being at 46%. Our peer schools are at 39%, and the state average is at 40% for high schools. So again, another thing we're very proud of our students and our staff in terms of their work and commitment to improving the learning environments in those areas. Post-secondary enrollment. This was another area for us that we did realize it was just more of a counseling issue and staying on top of kids and their EDPs and making sure they were getting things around and staying motivated for college and making good choices as they were transitioning out of the school. So when we started 15, 16, and this was the first year I actually collected good data around this and was able to pull data on this. We were at about 70% for post-secondary enrollment. We did dip to 67% in 16, 17, but then we made it back up to the 70%. Again, if you take a look at our peer district and the state average, we were above those two groups finally. And that was really our gauge on how things were going. So high school, I guess this would be a good point to pause with some of the high school reform efforts. Do you have any questions on those? No? Okay, perfect. 3 through 8. I would like to make a note on this because not to be deceiving, but if you were to take a look at 16, 17 and extend that out to 17, 18, we did follow the state trend and we did have a decline there as well. Okay, so I didn't get it on the graph because I wanted to show back in 2012-13 how we were progressing, but we did follow the state trends and we went down. Now, as I took a look at your scores, you didn't decline there. You plateaued. You declined a little bit in 17, 18, but you stayed right on track in 16, 17. So interesting to see how your kids responded or what went on in your district as you disaggregated that information. But this has been basically our work in ELA. And again, for us, every opportunity we have to show growth and be above the state average, that was our goal at the time in South Haven. So the curriculum improvement approach, I'm sorry, did I miss a slide there?
Nope, you're
No.
good.
Okay.
We were
You're
hearing
Look at my
wind.
face, we're not hearing voices, we're hearing noises somewhere,
Wind.
so.
Oh, okay. Maybe I'm wiggling this or something.
There you go. That might be it.
What it is.
I have a tendency to talk with my hands, as you can see, so I apologize for that. So I did want to share, some of our philosophy, or my philosophy, in terms of leading some of the reform efforts. I didn't want to dig too deep into this because then it'll just get technical and boring. But from just a glimpse at this, we did commit to a school improvement framework, or not a school improvement framework, but a framework for continuous improvement. On the framework, I talked to school districts quite a bit about, when I consult or actually been in the district, the difference between strategic planning and school improvement planning, because oftentimes buildings get those confused and they kind of lose their sense of whether they should be following district and state initiatives or whether they should actually be focused on school improvement strategies. School improvement strategies are what I would consider the first two areas of a SWOT analysis, your strengths and weaknesses. School improvement strategies are it's a management issue within the district, and it's with the internal stakeholders that are just committed to, making sure that we're improving the students and closing those gaps and committing to instructional delivery and monitoring how effective those delivery systems are. More of a strategic planning piece where you get to more opportunities and threats, and so those are bigger, and you usually include external stakeholders to identify those, and they typically have a sense of or come along with some community values in terms of what the opportunities they'd like you to seek out. So those are more of the strategic initiatives that could go on in the building. So when we talked to our staff about that, we said, look, you need to be committed to your school improvement efforts, and that needs to be 85% of your work. As the district focuses on more strategic efforts, we'll begin to pilot from the district level and work with you on piloting or creating these additional programs. But we really wanted their focus to be on closing those achievement gaps, making sure that we are improving all students and success on those tests, and ensuring that we are creating quality learning environments. So that's kind of how we had that conversation between the two. The next area was the curriculum management process. I mentioned to you, we worked more on systems. That way we have controls from central office. So in our curriculum management system, we were talking about how your pacing of the curriculum was. We were able to get through the curriculum through the year, how the curriculum was divided up into units. Were we able to expose all the students to the full curriculum at the appropriate rigor? Also, how are we collecting evidence to show that students were progressing through the curriculum and learning what they needed to be learning? How are we addressing students that were falling below benchmark in the curriculum? And then finally, that was the data analysis piece. And then finally, how are we making informed decisions on what we should do to solve some of our problems? So when we took a look at the data analysis, we could go back and say, oh, that's a curriculum issue because we have a gap in the curriculum, or we don't have materials, or we need professional development on how to deliver this aspect of the curriculum. Or we could go back and say, well, we've had all that training, we've done everything, it's more of an instructional quality issue, we just need to make more of a commitment to it, and we need to be more efficient at teaching that subject or delivering that strategy, and that became part of their PLC conversations. So that process allowed us continuous monitoring and created opportunities for professional dialogue on the teachers' behavior and how they saw the curriculum and where they needed additional supports, or it's just something they need to focus on and work within their groups and become more proficient at. So that was a big part of the whole curriculum management system, and that's part of the school improvement process as well. The third area was, again, back to the leadership capacity, and in terms of, where are we at with our teacher leadership capacity, where are we at with our building administrators' instructional leadership capacity. And so we were very intentional about making sure that we had a clear understanding of what their roles were, and we wanted to flatten the organization out as much as possible in the school improvement process. So we created team-based teacher leaders at the grade level, and we trained our team-based teacher leaders on an adaptive model where you have collaborative norms. We trained them on how to use data analysis protocols, and then they were facilitating their own meetings. And the interesting thing about that is then the meetings weren't really an event, because you have 4 or 5 teachers in the hallway all the time, and it became a continuous conversation with them because you had established that position, build that technical capacity in that team-based teacher leader so that that person could facilitate those conversations on a daily and ongoing basis. So that really helped create this culture and commitment to school improvement, and it gave them a lot of ownership of the school improvement and process and the curriculum, because they were making the decisions and they controlled all the data, and they were just being accountable for showing evidence that kids were progressing during their PLC meetings with the principals after that. When we get to area number 4, that's the district level leadership, and that's the governance piece. Just in a nutshell, when we talk about district level leadership, I know the board clearly understands that your relationship with the superintendent is probably the most important relationship in the district, but it's also our ability to create organizational effectiveness and increase our organizational capacity. So what strategies are we using as a governance team to create, this culture of excellence by creating structures and increasing our capacity within the organization to move the district forward? And that needs to be a conversation that central office should have in terms of how they're supporting the buildings and the principals by increasing the capacity for the overall organization. So we took a very detailed look at that, even all the way to the point where we were talking about the superintendent's relationship with the building administrators, and it became more of an executive coaching role rather than just a monitoring role. So a lot of the direct reports with the principals for me, we focused on 4 domains of instructional leadership practices, and it became evidence-based. So principals would just bring out evidence of the instructional leadership practices that they had engaged in during that month, and we would talk about them. We talked about how it worked, what didn't work, and what they may need to go back and tweak, what supports they may need from central office, and then they move forward. So it turned into more of a coaching model rather than just, did you get this done, did you get this done, checklist type thing. Last but not least was the fiscal responsibility. Coming into South Haven, it was extremely important that we maintained our fiscal responsibility after that. We didn't fall behind in our curriculum and in these positions that we had structured in the district to make sure that we were able to maintain this continuous improvement model. So we also talked about that. Now, I don't know that this would be the same framework I would recommend for every district that I was in, but it seemed to work well focusing on these areas and these domains in South Haven, so we kind of tailored that to the South Haven group. Then just to make it a little bit easier to understand, I talk about this continuous improvement model because everybody's focused on what we're doing that particular year and how far you get with it. Some initiatives actually take 2 or 3 years to really get going. So for us in central office, we needed to know what we were going to do year 1, okay, and what we were committed to, and then where we would finally see evidence of growth in year 2 of certain reform initiatives. What I've also done is I've taken each one of those more specific strategies for the school reform and related it back to the 5 areas of domain that I showed you on the bigger sheet. So that way our board knew that we had alignment in terms of the strategy we're using and the reform plan that I had given them that I just went through, if that makes sense. So it was easy to communicate. It was that congruency, it was that alignment, and it seemed to make everybody, it was easy to have clarity and easy to maintain our focus. So that was very valuable because then we weren't going off on another tangent or following up with a different program or strategy because we hadn't planned for it. One of the things I've seen districts do a lot when they don't have these processes and this level of clarity in place is we have a tendency to start guessing and checking. And I call those random acts of improvement, and that's what burns the staff out mostly. We go to implement a program, we don't get the return on the investment for it, and then we say, okay, so that wasn't a good program for us, and we jump to the next program. This limits that type of decision making because you're more evidence-based. You're making your plans 3 years out, and you're looking more towards the implementation of that plan and providing structures and supports for that, if that makes sense. Last but not least, our top to bottom rankings with our groups. This particular slide shows the grade level proficiencies and whether we were actually improving or dropping. So this happens to be a nice little visual for what we were doing with our top to bottom rankings in terms of closing some of our achievement gaps. So like the top to bottom 30. Top to bottom 30 was our biggest struggle in South Haven. We did very well on making adequate yearly progress with all of our subgroups. It was our top to bottom ranking that hindered us the most. So this was an important slide for us because if we were going to actually really get a boost in our top to bottom ranking scores or our accreditation scores, we needed to address that top to bottom ranking. One of the things that, and I'll note this so you know this really does impact certain districts. we had, I think, 11 subgroups. There's 13 possible subgroups that you can have in a district in terms of whether they made their adequate yearly progress. South Haven had 11. The reason the subgroup adequate yearly progress was so important is because in the old accreditation system, if a subgroup didn't make adequate yearly progress, you lost a whole color. You weren't docked because the points were based on 100% points, and if you were 90, you were the brightest of all colors, I think, of the green, and then you moved to a lime green if you were in the 80 percentile range. But for us, we lost 2 colors. I think at the district level, we were 88% one year, almost lime. We lost 2 colors because I had 2 subgroups not make adequate yearly progress. My position on that was I had 9 subgroups make adequate yearly progress, and you're docking me 2 colors for not having two subgroups, they were a group of males, Hispanic males in math, and I think the same group of Hispanic males in science didn't make adequate yearly progress one year, and we lost 2 color codes for that. So that's why this was a big issue for our board in South Haven, because again they were on that dashboard a lot, and they wanted to make sure that our schools were being highlighted in the best possible fashion. Community perceptions. This was one of the districts where I have to say, working with the community was probably the best experience I had. Most of the districts I'd been in earlier, was a short stay and there were turnaround efforts, and so it was that sense of efficacy with the teacher and the team building and more the internal piece. Community sure was appreciative of the work we did in those other districts, but in South Haven, the community actually really became connected to the schools. When I first came to the district, there was almost no relationship between the city and community organizations and the high school. The high school was a very, very old building. I think it was built in the 50s. It had no renovations really other than some efficiencies and controls added to it, so it looked the same as it was when it was built back in the 50s. The graduation rate was poor, as I mentioned. Our retention rate was very poor in the district. We had a lot of students either going to the north or the south of us for more affluent communities and taking part of their programming. So there was a real perception issue in the district. The board had struggled with superintendent relationships for a couple years, and that was a definite negative in the community because that was very transparent, and they clearly were not a good match for each other. And then they had some tough labor relations on top of that, and that made things a little bit worse for them. So at that point in time, the concern is we were having a lot of students leave the district. The first year I had there, I took a look, and our retention rate from our 9th graders to 10th graders that year, I think we were only like 75%. So we lost 25% of our 9th graders going into 10th grade that year. We were also seeing a big exodus from our 3rd grade students before they went to the 4th grade program transition. So we knew that we needed to do something with our perception in the community. By the end of this, the real fix of it was, I think, with the academic growth. That's where we gained a ton of parent support when they knew we were making a real commitment to educating their kids, and it was very visible that our focus was on improving the quality of their educational experience. Our parents ended up passing our bond for us. The bond had failed 2 years before that. We had a citizens community that involved 2 parents, and they were, trust me, great parents with a lot of capacity and a lot of energy. Give them a lot of credit for helping sell the bond. But really it was the group we were communicating to, and our stakeholder group was our parents. We knew that if all of our parents supported the bond, it would easily pass within the community just in terms of the voting population. So we worked very hard that first year to get our parents on board with this. In South Haven, remember, a bit of a resort community there, so we go from some families to more of the seniors that live within the city and in the lakefront homes. And we knew that we needed their support on this as well, because they had kind of distanced themselves from the school also. So we worked hard to, after we passed the bond, we worked hard to look for ways to connect them to our future strategic planning efforts and give them an opportunity to feel the buildings and use the buildings and feel like the buildings were part of the community. South Haven was a fairly small community and lacked a lot of resources in terms of community resources. The other partnership we ended up having that was very critical to the district was with the city manager and the city. There had been no strategic partnership there. after we passed the bond and it improved our achievement rates, our city manager was actually sending his children to a private school locally. He brought his students back to the K-12 public, and we enrolled them, and then we even went on to create a partnership where we were creating more community fields. We had some land, and they applied for grants in the city, and then we were able to create some premier soccer fields in one section. The township made a commitment to purchase 40 acres of property just a little bit farther south of our campus, and they were going to put the baseball and softball fields out there. Otherwise, we had about 27 youth softball teams and baseball teams trying to get on one or two fields. And of course, the varsity coaches and junior varsity coaches are upset because their fields are getting worn out before the season even got started. We also had a strong partnership with Lake Michigan College. They had a campus in South Haven as well as in Benton Harbor. And we created a middle college program there for our students, and that was part of that early college options. We wanted to make sure our students had access to that. And then, again, the robotics piece was probably the biggest area for us to connect with the community. We started robotics, I think, after I was in the district for 3 years, and that's where the STEM and the robotics piece just took off for us. When we started the robotics program, we were surprised that we had the number of students that were interested in the program, and we had a very good advisor to start the program. The very next thing that happened is we had 40 mentors coming into our school to help assist our students. And then we had all these manufacturing shops helping develop parts for our kids because they didn't have the capacity to put these parts together. So we had engineers coming in and helping them design parts for, the kids would dial up the part, then the engineer would take it and say, okay, you got to get it in CAD and then send it to us and we'll try to manufacture it for us. So they had that level of relationship with our local manufacturers. And don't get me wrong, our local manufacturers are like state-of-the-art manufacturers. We have one group in town that actually they have a hydraulic system, and they create high-pressure filters and pumps to force out water. They created basically a machine that will wash an Apache helicopter in 4 minutes when it would normally take the crew for over 4 hours to do it. And so we were kind of the hub for that. They'd fly the helicopter in for demos. Amazing even looking at those helicopters up close. But they would fly them in. So we're not talking about like a small little tool and die shop. We're talking about folks that are working nationally and internationally on projects. So it was great to have our kids were exposed to some very high quality engineers and programming. So the other piece of the robotics that I like to share with folks is that community and connectedness. We had the mentors come in, then we had all of a sudden the funding came through. Our students qualified for Worlds my last year there, and the Worlds come about very quick because you make it through regionals and all of a sudden you're in the Worlds, where our students were about $15,000 short of being able to travel to Worlds. So our realtors actually stepped up and fundraised $15,000 for the kids over the weekend so that they could pay their dues and make it to Worlds one year. So then all of a sudden the realtors became very involved in the school, and I was conducting more walkthroughs for potential home buyers and parents and families, and they were talking about how the school really became a way to begin to sell more homes to families in South Haven rather than just resort folks, because there was a concern about having year-round families in South Haven and not just becoming a complete resort town. So those are some of the things that happened. And then even on the curriculum side, the robotics piece got so popular it became part of our core curriculum. So we ended up kind of embedding that into pre-engineering program and taking the best parts of both. We established K through 12 STEM opportunities for our students. So our students in South Haven begin coding at kindergarten. They're 3D printing at the 3rd grade. They're running CAD at the 1st grade. So that there's a complete curriculum for our students all the way through K-12. When they get to the high school, they move into a fabrication lab. At the 4-5 building, we have an iCreate lab, which is all Macs, and they're producing 3D environments and putting their research papers in those. I forgot I was back on that time limit again. If you give me a minute, I'm just going to keep going. So, questions for you though. I did finally come to the end of that.
I'm going to go ahead. We'll ask Juan to switch off from the presentation and bring in Mr. Monkmel so that we have the opportunity to engage him in conversations as well. And then
And would it be Would you like me up here, or would you like me seated now?
Why don't you go ahead and have a seat so you're comfortable, and move into the next phase of questioning from the board. In the meanwhile, if you have questions from the audience, please begin putting those together too, or as we proceed here.
Hello? You there? Yep. Okay. Do you have your cameras working? It is. Excellent.
Okay, awesome, thank you. Mr. Johnson?
Thank you. Dr. Herrera, welcome. Thank you for being here today. Couple of, actually, just a question. And first, let me apologize. I was not here at the previous interview that you did, so this is my first time meeting and seeing you, so again, thank you. Very impressive what you've put up. I've got a question for you regarding Farmington Public Schools. What is the biggest issue that you see today with Farmington Public Schools? And can you give us a short path that you think we could use to correct that?
Yes. Based on my conversations with the staff and the students and members of the community, the message seemed very clear in terms of what concerns they would have about the district. And I guess just in a nutshell, I think that the issues are more around climate issues. I don't think they're cultural issues that you have, or culture issues that you have in the district that are deep-seated. I think you've had a couple of events and some things that occurred that have maybe been beyond the district control with finances, that you had to make some difficult decisions in terms of the high school decision. You've had some issues in buildings that have created some tensions in terms of some of the demographics of the district and diversity issues. You also have concern from the staff about certain levels of achievement with some subgroups that you have in the district, and their opportunities to actually participate in higher level programming due to their achievement rates. I think all those things are easy to fix. Well, not so much easy to fix, easier to say how to fix than to fix, I guess I should coin it. But those things are probably more symptoms of the bigger issue in terms of the district having a lot of clarity and focus on where it's going to go and what we're going to become. That was the thing that folks said to me is when I asked them, so, what's really next for Farmington? Where do you see yourself in, 3 to 5 years, or what's the vision here, and what will you become, and what could you commit to in terms of more of a compelling vision, and what would that look like? So I think the district members that I talked to today are sitting in a situation right now where we're not completely happy with our school right now. We know we have a good school and we have a lot of good things going, but something's just missing. So maybe it's time to regroup, refocus, recommit to something, and get moving towards something rather than always focusing on some of the negatives. And don't get me wrong, you're going to have to address some of those issues that you have. There's going to have to be some healing and transition of those high school students into the high school. We're going to have to work on reducing the achievement gap and ensuring that kids are learning at a level where they have equal opportunity and equal access to all programming, and they're not missing out on certain aspects of programming because of where they fall academically. And we're going to have to make sure that we begin to actually just commit to some of your prior plans in terms of becoming more global-minded. In terms of in global mindedness, in my opinion, is like with your IB program. I think that describes what you really hope to achieve here with your students, and that's a good understanding of multiculturalism and diversity, and acknowledging different cultures and knowing how to work with different cultures, but also respecting and knowing your own culture. And I think if we could work more towards those learner profiles or establish these capacities in our students, I think that's the part that's going to move the district forward. And I guess the only thing I would add to that I haven't really noticed intentional work on is how you're connecting strategic partners and organizations in the community to the school, not just so they have input, but they have some involvement and ownership in some aspect of the school, kind of like I mentioned in South Haven with our local manufacturers and our realtors and folks like that. The schools, as we know, are oftentimes the community's identity. And I think when everybody's very proud of their school and they can see themselves in the school, it just makes for a very strong school community. And then you get on that, you start building that momentum with that perception, and good things start to happen. But as far as your staff concerned, I think they're looking for ways to solve those problems. They want to address those problems, and they want to effectively address those problems. I didn't get from anybody that they were indifferent to those problems, or they didn't think they were real.
Mr. Muckamow,
Yes.
do you have a question?
Good evening, Dr. Herrera.
Hello.
So I was very interested in your presentation about your discussion about the SWOT analysis. And I was wondering if you did a SWOT analysis for Farmington Public Schools as part of your planning.
I did not.
Okay. But now I know that you have had a look at the district's strategic plan. As it's currently written, do you believe that it provides a sufficient amount of accountability to the superintendent and the school administrator?
He's still there.
Mr. Muckamow, are you there?
I am.
Okay,
Can you hear
sorry,
me?
you broke out after the accountability.
Oh, I'm sorry. Do you believe that the district's strategic plan, as it is currently written, provides sufficient accountability to the superintendent and school administration?
How about if I respond by saying that I think within the strategic plan, your focus areas are very good choices, and I think they will, they're broad enough, and I think you can work with them to help, identify the needs of the district and move forward. The way the strategies are written, I think some could use a little more clarity and clarification. I think you need to specify what the real outcomes or the visible outcomes you'd like to see. So with your strategic plan, I think it's more of this vision of what this really looks like, and what evidence you're providing of the achieving that goal area. I didn't see in terms of the communications on your strategic plan evidence of success anywhere. I don't know if I didn't mine down into the documents far enough. I saw some graphs of levels of implementation and what year you were heading on there. But I don't know what the reports back to the board and the community look like on your progress. So I suppose if I were to take a deeper look at what those documents look like, and dig a little bit deeper in terms of the evidence you're collecting, I could speak more towards the accountability and how we're responding to that, monitoring it, and showing that there's a return on the investment, or our true commitment to those strategies.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Mr. Rich?
Hello.
I think two things that are part of my question are, first, why Farmington Public Schools? There are positions out there, people looking for superintendents. So why Farmington Public Schools? And then looking at it as, how are you going to be able to factor in the scaling up? It's 4 times the size of both Benton Harbor schools and South Haven as well.
Correct. Well, the first why is, as I mentioned in the presentation, I've done a lot of work, or I guess have been noted for a lot of work in terms of improving the district's achievement ranking and helping them out of a situation where they're on MDE's radar. Would like to mention, in terms of my career path, and maybe this will give you an understanding of how I came about these positions. I never formally applied for the ISD position. I was recruited to that position. I never formally applied to the Adrian position. I was recruited and offered a position there. And I never formally applied to the Benton Harbor position. I was recruited and asked to take that. I just have a hard time saying no, apparently. I don't know if they were the best career decisions, but if I thought I could help, was willing and ready to go. And I've never had a bad experience working with staff. I mentioned to you the satisfaction was when you get through those accomplishments, and you take a look at the teachers and administrators and those internal stakeholders of how they feel about their school that's very enjoyable, and I guess I like being part of that aspect. So with the why on Farmington though is I have to be honest with you, I doubt that I'll have experience another superintendency after this next round. I'm looking for one last superintendency to really commit to and move forward on. In this particular case, you're a very good school system. I'm not coming in here cleaning up a mess. Okay, you have strong foundations, you have good structures in place, and you have a lot to build on. Okay, so that's the other part of this is there's a lot of opportunities here. You have a lot of things you've done and that we can continue to move forward with and remain committed to, and continue to implement even at a further level that would bring about more opportunities for our students. But also you have all these other opportunities. Remember I mentioned some of the comments from the staff that I heard today. I think it's time to all of a sudden now really think about where we're going to be in the next 5 years. And timely-wise, having the opportunity to be part of that and something that's future-focused. Remember that's the other aspect of my career that I get very excited about. I left South Haven before we really got to take advantage of those transformational learning spaces and follow through on some of those global skills for the students and those 21st skills and creating those future-focused learning environments. So this district you're situated, it would be a good opportunity to begin to move that way and begin to create some clarity around what those classroom learning environments would look like. So Farmington, I believe, is great community. Community resources for the students because the future of education is going to be, getting students out in the community and more relevant real-world experiences and bringing those experiences into the district. That's the next step of delivery models, especially at the secondary. So all the resources you have, where you're currently situated, programming that you currently have that I am familiar with, I think I'm a good match for you. Also, if we do need to focus on closing those achievement gaps, I think I hope that I've been able to demonstrate that I do have the capacity to help assist the district with improving those learning environments for our students so that they can begin to take advantage of more higher level learning opportunities. The size of the district, that's the other thing that I somewhat long for, is when I was at the ISD, remember my role was, the ISD had probably 700 employees, and I was also responsible for allocating resources to 56 buildings throughout the county. So moving back to those more strategic teams and systems is something that's definitely in my comfort zone. And I would look forward to working again with an established team. Right now I wear many hats. I'm not only at the central office level, but I'm out actually putting out fires within the building and working with teachers on issues and assessments and things like that. So it would be a great opportunity for me to refocus and get back to being more system-minded myself. Having the opportunity to work with teams and allocate those resources or align those resources with what your new strategic vision might be and see where we could go. So I just see as I was telling the staff today that, from an outside perspective, I only see opportunities and positives in Farmington right now. I know when you're within the community, you often have to focus on some challenges and barriers that you have, but that's certainly not the perspective I've had at that time, or at this time, and I would certainly welcome opportunity to assist you in those efforts.
Mrs. Williams?
Could you please tell me what immediate next steps would be if you were selected as superintendent? What your immediate next steps would be around developing a culture of excellence, including improving curriculum, teaching and administrative practices, and embedding levels of support within schools. What would be your immediate next steps if you were selected as superintendent in order to move student achievement?
Okay, so if we were just focusing on the student achievement aspect of it, it would be to conduct an environmental or create an environmental scan, more so regarding curriculum audit. A curriculum audit, where are you really at with your curriculum? Where are you at with your delivery systems? How aligned are your tiered interventions to the curriculum? How are you monitoring how students are moving through the curriculum? And how are you making those decisions, kind of like I talked about in South Haven. Committing to that curriculum management process, I think, takes the guess and check out. So then we can really begin to mine in and identify areas that we need to improve on and commit to. The other piece of that is, remember, whenever you talk about an instructional delivery or you talk about a program, you're really talking about people. And so it's back to the culture. No matter what we do, we have to be focused on culture and creating this culture where we're empowering folks, and we're making sure that they're shared decisions, and there's a collaborative conversation going on, because getting the commitment from the staff from this, your staff has a lot of will to address this. I think it's more or less getting the commitment on the technical end to say, yes, we're willing to commit to that, and we're willing to give it, a full commitment to try to make sure it actually works. And then we're going to professionally take a reflective view on that to see why it didn't work. Just not cast it aside. And so using the data and creating that type of situation usually creates a culture where the adults begin to take ownership for the student learning. So it goes both ways. When I begin to implement evidence-based practices and implement a curriculum, and our students begin to gain, I develop that sense of efficacy. But on the same page, when the students aren't achieving, then I have this sense of ownership of the fact that they're not learning. And that sense of ownership for teachers and building administrators and central office staff is extremely important, because that's where you get the real commitment to making sure we're focused on ensuring those students are learning, and we're willing to go to any extent to ensure that they do learn.
Mrs. Smith?
Do you comprehension succession plan that you could share with the board when asked at a timely fashion? Could you present that to us?
A succession plan as I left the district?
Well, you're here in this district. If we selected you to be
Right.
our superintendent, would you be able to present us with a succession plan?
In terms of grooming future leadership in the
Yes.
district? Oh, absolutely. I know one of the things I talked to staff a little bit about today was, the capacity building piece and building leadership and technical capacity within the district to establish that culture of excellence. And we talked about more specific strategies on, versus recruiting people for certain positions, the concept of growing your own. And sometimes the growing your own isn't, I'm going to grow you right into that position. Sometimes it's, I'm going to grow you into a lower position, and then I'm going to invest in you so that we believe you have the skills and the will and the ability to eventually hold this position. So I think it's a real intention to go out and identify folks that you can grow and improve their capacity so they can become future leaders in the district. It would be the same thing in terms of trying to create more equity in terms of the diversity of your teaching staff. It's very hard to go out and recruit, minority teachers or administrators just right off the street. It's a very competitive market, actually, in most areas. So what's another avenue around that? Well, growing your own. And sometimes, I've had a lot of experience where very skilled paraprofessionals want to become teachers. So how do we invest in them and give them an opportunity to grow into teachers, and then we keep them here and invest in the community? So I think it's more of a creative approach and looking at individual people and their skills and ability. And if those would be suitable for a higher level job, then we need to invest in them, and then we need to try to keep them in the system and give them opportunities to grow and learn as leaders and professionals. And that doesn't all just come from the superintendent, because I don't have that level of relationship with all staff like building principals and supervisors do. So that would have to be something that was very intentional from the administrative staff to help that succession planning come alive. But I agree with you. I joke around with, as you can see from my presentation and the fact that I have a hard time not giving you a ton of detail. Every time I come to work, I joke around saying I try to work myself out of a position. I'm trying to build capacity in everybody so that they're ready to go without me.
Thank you.
Mrs. Cummings?
Hello again. You mentioned, I believe it was at the beginning of your presentation, so correct me if I am misstating something, that when you stepped into the position in South Haven, that the superintendent and the board relation wasn't great. Maybe that's prior to you getting there. How did you approach this situation? How did you begin your work as superintendent, knowing that the relationship may have not been the best previous years?
Yeah, well, with the prior superintendent, there was, he had been in the district for 6 years, and the relationships, just were not there any longer, and it was mutual. And I can't really comment how it got to that point. It was just very visible at the end of his service to the district. With the board, and a lot of the board members that are still around, we joke around a lot about this even today, is I didn't have a 4-3 split board. We had a 3-way split board. We were 2, 2, and 3 that usually bonded together, and they were keeping score, so they would, lobby and support some folks on this and some initiatives on that. And so they were, the board was really, because of the relationship with the superintendent, got in a position where they were really running the district. The ugly term for that is micromanaging, but when there's a lack of leadership, it falls to the board in terms of making certain decisions that the boards aren't often in a position really to make and follow through on. That's the tough part of it. So the board was put in a very difficult place. There was nobody really there. Because the superintendent didn't have a good relationship with the full board, there was really no opportunity for him to bring the board together as a group either. So we talked a little bit about strategically committing to advisory committees, subcommittees in the board. And that's not always the best thing to do when you have a board that's having a hard time agreeing or getting along. But the intention is that on the subcommittees, we would strategically, with the board president, he would have strategically assigned folks that didn't really get along or had differences of opinions on the same committee, so we'd have a chance to begin to get them to work together and to take a look at the future of South Haven and whether we could gain their commitment and support to work together more collaboratively. So in combination with that, we really started laying out some of the landscape for the district, some of the things we were going to have to focus on in terms of finances and curriculum and what that was going to mean to the district. And so I set some priorities in place for them that I thought we really needed to focus on. And then we broke them up into committees where they had to begin to talk and communicate and really begin to make recommendations as a committee to the full board. So part of that structure was the committees made the recommendation to the board, I didn't. And so the board was actually accepting recommendations from committee. And remember, the committees were split in the past, so the folks had to work together, come to consensus so they could make a recommendation to the board, full board. So, giving them an opportunity to do that, I have to give full credit because these are adults, and it was a matter of will, and they understood that that was going to be the best case scenario to move the district forward. The part we joke about is the board president was 100% against going to committees, and he was probably my biggest challenge coming in, and I was begging him and negotiating that to make that decision on our behalf, just to give it a try for a year. I think he's quite the golfer, so I think I even offered to caddy for him a couple times. But he did make the commitment, and he did show very good leadership in terms of getting the board to function that way. The only one other thing we had an agreement on at the time was, from my perspective, and to be able to maintain my relationship with the board, because we did acknowledge that they were split on several decisions, was that if we would all agree on a process, we would live with the decision. Because I knew certain decisions would be made that would cause the board to be split again, and I didn't want that just to be a reflection on me and my relationship with that particular board member. So we talked about, we very clearly identified what our decision-making processes were going to be, and even how we were going to communicate those decisions to the community, how we were going to build in wait time. So we always had anything that was a key decision, we had it on 2 board agendas first. It went from committee to the board agenda. Then from the board agenda, the board could move it to an action item at the next board agenda, or if there were concerns about it, they could send it right back to committee again for further study and to come back with another recommendation. So we just slowed that process down quite a bit. So the district moved fairly slowly that first year, but sometimes slower is faster.
Dr. Rera, as a system, we've experienced declining achievement as many districts. What programs, innovations, or strategies do you believe are the most essential and impactful toward right-setting the achievement trajectory for all of our students? And which have you had personal experience with that you would bring with you?
right? I had this discussion with staff a lot today because they kept asking, so what did you do? And I would kind of explain to them what I did, and they said, but what did you use? And I would say, well, but this is what we used, and this is what we did. So if I knew of a program that was going to solve your problems, I probably wouldn't be sitting here right now. My career path would have been much different. Solving problems with, in terms of identifying problems that are related to achievement. Remember, there's no one. All students learn differently and at different paces, and it's your ability to problem solve and come up with solutions and effectively implement those solutions, and then go back and reflect on how it went, and then move towards even improving the next step. So there's no easy path to this. It's what I call effort and strategy. If your strategies aren't working, did you not apply enough effort or will? And if you didn't apply a real effort or commitment to actually implementing that strategy, then it should be no surprise that strategy didn't work. So the formula is simple. But the key things to focus on, and I hope this addresses your question, is back to the curriculum. Making sure that students are, a viable curriculum, and making sure that students are exposed to the full curriculum at the level of rigor it's intended to be taught at is the way to improve all students' level of achievement. High expectations, high outcomes for all students. All students. We don't water things down for any students because we don't believe they can learn. Okay, so that's the first non-negotiable, I think, in terms of that the staff would have to commit to in terms of ensuring that you were going to improve learning for all students. And then it's more of how we go back and problem solve for students that aren't responding well to the delivery. What evidence do we have that shows that they're not being successful or they are growing? What evidence do we have that we effectively implemented that strategy? And that becomes that instructional leadership role. And how are the building administrators monitoring the implementation and student growth? So one of the things I talked to the staff about today was, let's just keep it simple in terms of how schools really function. Teachers, the goal for teachers is that they become the best or most skilled facilitators of student learning that we could possibly have in front of our children. Okay, and we need to protect their time to do that and give them the supports and resources that allow them to do that. And teachers make good and great classrooms, we know that. Building principals need to ensure that students are learning and that we're actually monitoring all the aspects of the programming that would ensure positive outcomes for our students. So building principals create good and great schools. Teachers create great and good classrooms. Building administrators create great schools. Central office's role in this, I mentioned to you, what do? We focus on organizational effectiveness, organizational growth, making sure we're improving our capacity in our organization to continue to grow, and make sure we're structuring and aligning resources to support our focus areas. So when everybody works together like that, usually good things happen with students, but it's a combined effort. There's just no one program. Remember, programs are people, strategies are people, and it takes that culture and those systems to make sure that you're really bringing those to life.
Do we need to go to public questions?
Not just quite yet.
We're okay?
Yep.
Mrs. Smith.
If placed in as a superintendent, how would you handle a situation regarding sexual misconduct within the workplace? And how would you handle race issues throughout the district regarding staff or students?
Well, I think we need to have our due diligence in terms of conducting comprehensive fact-finding to truly investigate what occurred and who was involved in the incident. I think it's just our professional responsibility and ethic to address things when they occur like that. I know there's certain decisions superintendents and district administrators make that will impact their survival due to politics and within the community. I've always fallen back on the phrase that I'm going to do what's in the best interest of the students and the school, and I hope I have the political savvy to survive it, or I hope I've earned the credibility to survive those tough and difficult decisions. But I think that you have to just make a decision based on the facts, and you have to make a decision on that particular incident, and then you handle the crisis management or the fallout of that with the community. But if I were to not be successful making a decision, I would, or not have support in terms of a decision I would make, I would rather have made the decision that I truly believed was the right decision in terms of what was best for the folks that were involved in the incident, and I would treated them fairly and equally in that decision-making process. And then if I was held accountable for that decision and the outcome wasn't pleasant, I could at least walk away with my head held high. I can't imagine what it would be like to sweep something under the rug or be indifferent to a situation and then be held accountable for it. So for me, it's just a matter of doing what's right and making the right decision when you're in a situation where it truly needs to happen. And those are very key issues, and districts can't take those lightly. And I think when we have situations like that, I think that's how we earn our credibility as a district, because those things happen everywhere. But we earn our credibility by letting folks know that we're addressing them, and we're serious about addressing them.
Okay, Dr. Herrera, we're going to move into questions from the public, and we've got quite a few. So I'm going to,
Okay.
some hopefully can be shorter answers,
Yes.
but I've got a long question to begin with. So,
Okay.
are you ready?
Yes.
I might have to repeat, so here we go.
I'll take notes.
With Farmington's Golden Apple status, with respect to community resources provided in support of its public schools ranking, it in the 90th percentile of the state. What is your perspective of where Farmington's achievement standards should be relative to the state? That's question one. In general, should Farmington set higher goals and targets or fall back in line with state-sponsored directives achievable statewide by public schools? In particular, include in your response the state-sponsored choice of evaluating student academic progress by growth alone or by growth to a minimum standard and legislation recently signed by Governor Whitmer, delaying the scheduled increase from 25 to 40% in the weighting of student growth and academic progress to be used in year-end teacher and administration evaluations.
Got it.
You got it. Yeah.
You wanna share that?
You just got an A then.
You want to pass that, Tim, so we can read it? Or-
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
Does that help you, Doctor?
Yeah. Remember, I forgot my glasses, but we'll see. Okay, so the first part of the question was, do we believe we should be higher than in the 90th percentile? The way schools are judged and ranked in the percentile, that ranking is so volatile. Remember, it depends on how other districts do. So you could not improve at all, and other districts could do worse, and your rank goes up. So it's an interesting formula. So I don't put, it's a good gauge and it's something to consider, but I think 90th percentile is a very good ranking. Certainly we're committed to improving the success of all of our students anyway. So that's not an issue. I don't know strategically, though I don't have a formula or a game plan on how you would move it to the 95th percentile, other than just focus and maintain commitment to what you're currently working on in terms of quality of the instructional and learning environments. The state-sponsored directives, if I'm reading into that question right, in districts like Farmington, your students are above benchmark, probably at a grade level before they even reach the grade level where they're at. So you're not bound to as many compliance issues and state, mandated programs as other districts that are below benchmark. It's the below benchmark districts that find that they have to say that they're using these state mandated programs. Districts that are well above benchmark, you're not on MDE's radar in these state mandated programs. There may be certain compliance issues we're bound to report on, but I don't think that would impact your programming as it currently exists. The other piece in terms of the growth rate, I really like growth rates. I think growth rates are probably more challenging for your district than they are for Benton Harbor area schools right now. Remember, our students are several grade levels below benchmark, and so getting their growth is something we can accomplish, mostly just due to effect size. They haven't been exposed to quality tier 2 and tier 3 interventions, and so exposing to them, we're going to get significant growth out of them. As a matter of fact, this year in Benton Harbor, our students hadn't received, we don't have a student proficient on an M-STEP exam for 3 years, I think only in maybe 1 or 2 grade levels. But we are now having students, several grade levels, scoring above national norm growth on their NWA assessments. So we are getting growth out of them. But if you think about very high-performing students, it's tough to get growth. I mean, you're really teaching beyond the curriculum now, and you have to expose them to things maybe 2 or 3 grade levels to begin to get that growth rate. So it's very challenging in terms of growth. So growth is kind of this, it depends on the student and the situation you're in. The other piece is on the one thing that I'm really opposed to is ever agreeing that state mandated test or an indicator of the quality of instruction going on in the classroom. That is just simply not true. I know I may take a beating from the state level on by saying that publicly, but it is not an indication of the quality of instruction. We know that on standardized tests, there are 3 factors that impact the student's ability to do well. And one is the quality of instruction, so we'll give them that one. But the other 2 are where they come to school in terms of their readiness to learn. That's another one, and that's out of our control in certain communities. The third area is their opportunity to learn outside of school strongly impacts how they do on standardized tests. And we know in some communities that's out of the control. So you can't put a lot of status in the quality of instruction based on a standardized test. In my opinion, standardized tests are a great indicator of organizational health and your commitment to curriculum alignment and school improvement processes and reducing those gaps. So I think they're a fair assessment of that. When it comes down to using assessments for individual student growth, the 25 to 40 percentile piece, or 40% of the teacher's evaluation piece, where we're currently at with our data collection and the validity and reliability of it, it's probably not fair to educators to put that much stock in it. I think it's simply that. But we've moved to an SLO process, and the SLO process is where the teachers choose the goals that they're going to work on with their students, and the department chooses the goal areas they're going to work on with the students, and then they create tests to measure their students at the beginning of the year, and then they measure their students' growth on those goal areas at the end of the year, and you get that, so you get teacher-to-teacher score comparisons as well. And so then you can start beginning to collect your own trend data with your own population and not a big norm study. So I'm a big fan of the SLO process if we're going to commit to really taking a look at growth rates and have teachers buy into those assessments and commit to those learning targeted goals for our students. So I think that's a fairer process. I'm not sure that statistically I could ever come up with something that would be defensible in terms of true student growth and a cause and effect with the teacher. But I think that gives us a sense of how the teacher's doing with delivering the curriculum and if students are progressing through the curriculum and learning. And I think that's what it's really all about.
Thank you. Our next question is, what would you normally disagreed with the decision of the board?
I would hope to express quite frankly, if I had a concern, I would be afraid that it would have a negative implication on the district or the quality of a learning environment. I don't personally attach myself to districts. I serve the district. This is not my district. It's your district. So my only way I would caution you is if I felt that the board was making a decision that may not work out as well as you intended it to, or there may be things that you haven't really considered in that decision. But you hired me to make a full commitment to implementing that, and I have a fiduciary responsibility to the district to make that come about. So there is no question of how I would respond to that in the end.
Thank you. The next question is, how do you plan inclusion and understanding among all levels of employees and staff?
That's the part we talk about the creating this culture of having everybody have some ownership in it and input in it and making a commitment to it and seeing themselves having a role and being able to help support it. I think that's the biggest thing to bring folks together. And again, when you get in that team environment, when we begin to develop that efficacy because we're celebrating some of our short-term wins, you get more and more confidence, you get people more willing to work together and even a little bit more risk-taking, and they push themselves out of their comfort zone and they support each other. So I think as far as the overall staff goes, in terms of inclusion and working with groups. I think that's what we're talking about. So as in staff, the diversity issue, I think, is the different department areas, instructional support services, their different roles in the district. I see as more diversity. I don't know if they meant diversity between certain subgroups of staff, though, but I see it more as the entire school community working together.
Thank you. The next one is accountable for implementing and following district policy and have consistent consequences for violations.
I think working with administrators, I think that's more of that professionalism and that reflective piece and me serving as a coach. We work very hard to have clarity in terms of what it is we hope to accomplish or what our role in that is. The clarity is important because then I know everybody understands what needs to occur. So when we're assured that everybody has a firm understanding of that, then it's very easy to come back with an expectation that you followed through and you can show evidence of that. So what I found is when we become more evidence-based, it's very uncomfortable for somebody to show up at the table with the group and not have any evidence to show that they followed through with something. And I think that's more of that team piece that they feel like, okay, I'm kind of moving myself on the bubble of this team, and then that process starts. So you usually get them recommitted and re-engaging. The other piece of that is then with the building administrators, do they just not have the technical capacity, or does the staff not have the capacity to do it because we need to help assist them and develop that capacity in it, or is it a lack of will? And those are two different conversations in terms of accountability.
Thank you.
President Green, just to give you some perspective, right now it is 8:15, and from a timing perspective, we need to end in 5 minutes.
Got it. We'll get through as many as we can.
Okay.
All right. The arts and education is key to the development of students. What are your thoughts on arts education and the integration of arts in the curriculum in Farmington Public Schools?
Wholeheartedly support that. I've seen kids thrive and be more successful in school, and the added value to the core curriculum with the arts is what makes a school special.
Okay. As a new, wait a minute, hang on. As a newcomer to this part of the state, what strategies would you use to engage the greater community beyond parents? Community leaders, government leaders, other stakeholders, given over 70% of our residents do not have children in schools.
That's where I think, the way I phrase it to you, it's an opportunity to maybe refocus and come together and take a look at the future of the district. For the newcoming superintendent, it's a gift to be able to have a strategic way to get out and begin to meet with the broader community and take a look at what their perceptions are of the district and get some feedback from them.
Okay. What are your plans for increasing family engagement in education?
I really work with the buildings on that. I think the teachers and the building administrators are the best avenue to get out and work with their parents and their families and engage them in the student learning. So that's my primary focus, is to do that at the classroom and the building level. I think at the district level, we need to be conscious of what we're informing our parents about our district as a whole and the movement of the district to assure them that the district's financially stable and moving forward. So two different types of communication, but the engagement piece I would hope would be the focus of the buildings.
Looks like we're going to get through probably one more. I'm reading these correctly. How and with whom will you develop school safety policies, including detection of early warning signs in children, intervention strategies, emergency response plans, and post-crisis procedures? How and to whom will you communicate the basic framework and guidelines of these plans?
Your emergency operational procedural plan for the district usually comes through the county, and it's more of a community and county-based effort. So somebody usually comes in and facilitates your EOP, so to speak. Then with the building management guides, we usually just find somebody with a strong technical assistance. There are a lot of templates out there, but I've used some vendors and organizations to come in and help us put those plans together because they just have that technical expertise and they're up on the latest and greatest strategies and techniques. And then in the classrooms, we have emergency response guides for the teachers, and as in flip charts, so they know how to respond. The response teams, in the past I've used a critical stress management program and incident program where we bring in, there's a group trained on debriefing and providing supports during these times of crisis. And that group is trained, and then they become active when there's a major crisis in the district, and we just kind of fan them out to wherever they need to go, and they regroup and provide supports for that building. So those are the models I've used in the past, and they've worked well.
Thank you. Flown past, and we have many, many additional questions we wish we could have gotten to, but I think many were woven together.
Okay.
We certainly appreciate all of your time and efforts today. We hope that you saw what a shining district that we have, and met many of our superstar teachers and staff and our students as well. But we certainly appreciate your time today and coming out tonight. And you probably have many questions as well.
Well, I will hold off on my questions certainly at this point, but I would like to thank you again for your time and consideration, especially as my candidacy. And you do have a lot to be proud of what you've accomplished in the district, and maybe now's a good time to sit back and reflect on that with a smile and a grin too. But also, I guess my hope would be that that I've at least demonstrated that, I have the skills and ability and the desire to help support you, and that I would welcome any opportunity to serve the district. So hopefully I'll be able to hear from you in the future, and maybe we can have extended conversations yet.
Thank you very, very. Do you think 5 minutes?
Well, I think for your brains, you really should take
Yeah.
time, even though we're running a little late.
Take 10? Okay. We are taking a 10-minute recess. Can I get that? Dr. Herrera, did you give me back that question real quick? Sorry. We're back in session. I do want to let everyone know that Trustee Muckamel is been in Iowa, and he was able to participate in our first interview via Skype and live streaming. However, he just notified us that there is weather occurring in Iowa, that they have all had to take shelter. So we are going to do our best to somehow connect him back in, because I just want everyone to realize he has gone above and beyond to make provisions to be here for these interviews. He had booked a flight home for last week, which when we changed dates, he wasn't able to do. He paid for additional Wi-Fi to make sure all connections were good today, and has been working with our staff here to make sure that everything was up and running. So we just didn't factor in weather. So we'll just keep all of them in our thoughts and prayers in Iowa right now. Also wanted to remind everybody in the audience, if you're just joining us, there's feedback forms at the back of the room. Please fill those out, as well as there are forms if you want to ask questions of the candidate. We will ask those at the end of our questions. If you are viewing from home, you can find those feedback forms on the district website under the superintendent search and submit those immediately following the interviews. That site is being monitored to make sure we get all of that feedback before we begin our deliberations. Being said, we are moving on to our next candidate, and we are welcoming back Dr. Shivers. And so, welcome. We hope you have had a wonderful day in our district, and welcome you.
Good to see you again. Thank you.
My pleasure to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well.
Good evening.
Thank you. Nice to meet you. Once again, good evening to the board and to the community. Thank you for everyone being here. Before I get started, I do want to reiterate, I did have a fantastic day. I want to say thank you to my tour guides and to the students and the staff and the parents and the community members that took time out of their schedule, although I think the kids really cared that much, but they were kind of happy to be to be out a little bit. But it was a delightful day, and I got a chance to meet a lot of stakeholders in the district and hear from people firsthand, so I really appreciate the opportunity. I have been asked, as part of my presentation, to share with the board areas in which I have demonstrated leadership that has led to an impact on student achievement. In the interest of time, I am not going to go through my entire presentation. I provided you with the presentation, with notes, with links to artifacts, and other information, but I do want to focus on a portion of the presentation that is relatively new, meaning that it's the part that is focused on my work in Redford Union. So if I can ask the board to turn to that portion of the presentation with me. I am the work that has occurred in Redford. Let me just catch up here on the slides for those that are joining us.
There you go.
So the board specifically asked that I share this student achievement in light of our strategic plan, provide some stakeholder input as it related to our strategic plan, and then also my assessment of our strategic goals and how we are performing as a district. I want to put in context before I begin, because I do see some of my Redford colleagues here in the audience, and thank them for being here, that I'm sensitive to the fact that Redford Union is a small district, and when I entered into the district, they had not been engaged in strategic planning for almost a decade. And so a lot of the work initially had to been around developing the capacity to develop a strategic plan, sharing the vision and the redefining the mission of the district, and really helping the staff and the community see the connection between the strategic plan, the district improvement plan, and the individual buildings school improvement plan as a vehicle that all needs to move in concert with one another in order to raise student achievement. I do also digress and appreciate Donna's comments, because she said at the last time that you all were together that a smart candidate would watch the video, and I did. And so one of the questions that was asked by one of the trustees was specific to things like MSTEP and SAT scores, and Donna's comment was that it really depended on the strategic focus and the goals of the individual district. And I stress that because entering into Redford Union, I would liken it to a vehicle. And if you were looking for a vehicle to be able to move down the road, you would want to make sure that all parts of the vehicle are functioning. And I kind of would suggest that we are under the hood of Redford Union right now because our engine was not intact, and in some cases our engine was not even in place. And so our focus really has been on curriculum development. It's very hard to move student achievement forward when you don't have a curriculum that is aligned, when you don't have a curriculum that is well-defined, and when you don't have a curriculum that is articulated clearly, both vertically and horizontally. And the other area that we've been intently focused on is our culture, our learning environment, and making sure that our climate, our culture, our student discipline, our attendance are all moving in the right direction. So that's really been the emphasis of our work. On this first slide, I shared with the board the 5 areas of our strategic plan. I put emphasis next to our programs and academics and our learning environment and culture. And this is really where the bulk of my presentation is going to lie. Under the areas of program and academics, our focus has been on college and career readiness and college and career awareness. And that's extremely important because in the community, there was a lack of a narrative that was about what we do beyond high school. Our students had the opportunity to attend elementary, middle, and high school in the district, and many of our students were throughout the district, going from each building. But in many cases, we received students from outside of the district through school of choice. And so we had to really create kind of a uniform vision and mission to get students beyond the threshold of not just graduating and that being the goal, but also having a plan beyond high school. And that plan could include post-secondary, but if it didn't include post-secondary, our mantra became train your brain to do something and have a plan beyond high school that would lead to success. So K-12, we've had a focus on college and career readiness and have aligned our curriculum work, we've aligned our programs, we've aligned our academics and our student experiences to that first goal. The second goal that I'm going to emphasize is the learning environment and culture, and then that area, climate just simply has to come first. We had to look at our disproportionality, we had to look at student suspension, and the unfortunate cases of expulsion, which were rare. And then again, mentioning attendance, which I'll go to in just a little bit deeper. On this next slide, I shared with the board one of the things that I am proud of and really attest this to the strong team that I have at the high school, and that is that our graduation rate has increased every year over the last 3 years in the district. And this is not by accident. This is about having a focus on looking at our data and what our data tells us about the percent of students that were graduating from the high school, and then how we could work really together as a team to increase that each year. I did not include our SAT scores, but I will share with the board that while our SAT scores may have taken a slight dip, our PSAT scores at the 9th grade and the 10th grade are both trending up. So for example, our PSAT in the 9th grade in the area of literacy made a 10% improvement this last year, and in 10th grade it made a 6% improvement this last year. And then in the area of mathematics, both in the 9th and 10th grade, there's a 5% and a 7% increase respectively. I want to go on to the next slide, which is our NWEA scores. And I'm really proud of this progress because this speaks to student growth. And what you see in this slide is that we've had a continuous trajectory of positive increase in our student performance, less in mathematics than in language arts, but making growth in both areas. Now, I stop here and I stress this point with the board, and we'll digress a little bit to talk about our MSTEP scores, because I know our MSTEP scores have been brought up as an area of question and of concern. And I wanted to share with the board my perspective, because that's part of what I was asked to do about our achievement in the district and where we are in terms of raising student achievement. The first thing I want to remind the board is that when I came in, there was not a curriculum. And without a curriculum that is strong and that is solid and that is not just the written curriculum, but the actual top curriculum that teachers and administrators can be held accountable for, it is really hard to move student achievement. So as we have written and developed curriculum and implemented the curriculum, we have seen some progress, but we've also seen what is known as the implementation dip. And those of you that are in the classroom or have been in the classroom, you know that anytime you introduce something new, there is that period of time where you make some regression. So we've seen that. The second area that I want to bring up as it relates to our M-STEP scores is the fact that this past year was the first year that Redford gave the M-STEP online. Now, why is that important? That's important because most other districts gave the M-STEP online about 2 or 3 years before us, and we were told that our first year of giving M-STEP online, we would see a dip in our scores, and we did. And so we anticipated that dip. It's not something that makes us comfortable, but we did anticipate that dip. And as I shared with the board previously and also in my presentation, part of the reason why we had not given the M-STEP online is that because we had unreliable Wi-Fi, we had inoperable devices, and our infrastructure did not support us giving the assessment online. So all of those things have been fixed, and this last year and in this year we were able to successfully give the M-STEP online, and I believe we will see the reflection of our hard work and our dedication as we move forward. This next slide just kind of speaks to that. It just gives you a visual of, and to be honest with you, if my director of instructional technology was here, she would tell you that this is just a small fraction of what we have had to put in place in order to make sure that our district is technology ready. The next 2 slides that I put in here is to share with the board some information around Tier 1 interventions that we have put in place and the success that we've seen in student growth as a result of that. These 2 slides speak to eSpark, which is a technology-based intervention tool that meets students where they are. They boast that they are focused on personalized learning. Students take the NWEA test, and then they are given targeted assignments that are at their level in the areas in where they need intervention and an improvement. And then at the end of their quest, which is what they are called, students take a performance assessment where they have to, in their own words, explain verbally how they have learned new information, how they have transferred that new information, and how that new information will build on the next skill. It's quite phenomenal to see when you see first graders and kindergartners talking and telling about how they understand how cat and bat and sat all are words that they have learned to build their vocabulary because they understand the sounds, they understand the phonetics, and they understand the meaning behind it. And you get to see this, and you get to see students actually in their own words explain their learning. So it not only touches on the skills that they're focusing on, but it touches on those literacy skills of being able to present and being able to talk and be able to use their own thinking and their own words to describe their understanding. This next slide that I put in is to share the success of one of our programs that is specifically focused on college and career readiness, and that is our early college, which is in its 2nd year, going into its 3rd year next year, and about 10% of our high school students are participating in the early college. These students will graduate from Redford Union High School with a high school diploma and an associate's degree in a range of fields from business to accounting, to video gaming and animation, to phlebotomy, to computer science, and I could go on and on. Cyber security are some of the areas that students are studying at either Wayne County Community College or Schoolcraft. What I showed the board in this slide is that we have not only increased the credits that students are receiving. So we went from 144 credits to 568 credits by expanding this program. But you can also see the students that are in the early college are outperforming their peers in terms of their GPA. And so we're really excited about what this program is showing us and what it's developing in students, not only academically, but in the soft skills, the things that they will need to be employable beyond high school. This next slide speaks to something that Board Member Weems asked about innovation and creativity last time that we were together. I shared with the work that we've been doing in Redford Union around STEM, around our themes of aeration and aeronautics, and working with Captain Barrington Irving. I put in here the professional development slides so that you can see the work that we've done. I also included a link so that you could get some qualitative data, not just the quantitative data, coming firsthand from our teachers about the professional development that they've been receiving and how that professional development has impacted their instruction. Now moving to the focus area 4, which is focused on the learning environment and the culture. I noticed once I was reviewing this slide and preparing my presentation that I didn't include a key so that you knew exactly what you were looking at in this slide. So just bear with me one moment and let me share with you that yours is in color, and I believe it's in color on the screen as well. The blue to gray is what you're looking at, and then the orange to the kind of goldish yellow color is what you're looking at. And from the blue to gray, you are looking at from 1 year to this year, the percent of students going from anywhere from 10 to 19% of chronic absenteeism. And from yellow to the orange colors, or excuse me, from the orange to the yellow colors, you are looking at students who had 20% or more chronic absenteeism. So what you see is a declination, in some cases a steep declination, in the numbers of students that have had 10% or more of their school year has been missed. And I attribute that to a lot of the really hard work that we've done around attendance. Our attendance initiative was highlighted last night on Channel 4 News because of the work that we've been doing around campaign and marketing. We've been taking a deep dive into the data and looking at why students are not coming to school. We've been engaged in home visits, actually going to the homes and meeting with some of our families of our most truant students. And the most solid piece of the work that we've done is around a protocol, and our protocol has 5 levels in it that really define at each level how we will support the family and how we will intervene if students are not coming to school. All of those things coupled together have really led themselves and lend themselves to some positive results in student attendance. And the reason that I'm stressing that is because it does not matter how good we do in our school improvement or in our strategic plan. If the kids are not coming to school, they're not receiving the instruction and the opportunities. So we've really stopped, if you will, and put a strong focus on attendance this year, and we've seen the results. This next slide speaks to our cultural proficiency work. We still have a lot of work to do in this area, but it's not just around relationships, where oftentimes a lot of the cultural proficiency work can begin and end. It's about also looking at the gap between our policies and our procedures and how these gaps negatively impact and marginalize groups of students, particularly our students of color, but more importantly, our kids that fall into multiple subgroups. So they might be of color, and they might be free and reduced lunch, they may be special ed, or they may be homeless, or they may be all of the above. And they are the ones that struggle the most and that are most negatively impacted by the culture. And so we've really done a lot of work in this area. We will continue to do a lot of work in this area. We take this work very seriously in the district, and then all of these pieces kind of lead together to create a culture and environment where our students feel like they belong, and it shows in some of our data, which I'll show you in just a moment. The next slide speaks to, I think I showed you 3 years of a 5-year plan around restorative practices. And I didn't include in this slide the data around our suspensions and our office referrals, but just to give you a snapshot and example, in February of last year, district-wide, we had 154 suspensions. In February of this year, we had 31 suspensions district-wide. Last year in March, in terms of office referrals, we had 403 district-wide. This year, in terms of office referrals, we had 259 referrals. And so we know that a lot of the work that we're doing around building relationships with students, around cultural proficiency, around finding alternatives to suspension and expulsion is really working. I think I shared with the board in my notes that we started an alternative program at the middle school level to really help some of our most at-risk middle school students get back on track. It's called a Second Chance program, and it is for some students short-lived. 6 weeks in nature. For other students, it might be a semester or a year long, but it's all about addressing and attacking those behavioral issues, those social and emotional learning issues before we can even begin to approach and deal with the academics. This next slide kind of speaks to the stakeholder input portion of the strategic plan. I shared with you 4 areas of the survey that we do for our stakeholders that most directly links to these focus areas. The first 3 are related to our programs and academics, and the last area is related to our culture and climate. And as you can see in the last column, we've had positive growth in each one of these categories for our feedback, and this feedback group is coming from parents, students, staff, and community members. The other way that I get feedback on our strategic plan, 3 times a year, I hold something that's called Partnership Council. It is a luncheon that I provide for stakeholders in the community. I actually have one scheduled for tomorrow. Our business leaders, our city council leaders, our medical healthcare leaders in the community, our police and or fire liaisons in the community, parents in the community, as well as staff members come together 3 times a year. I liken to say it's kind of a mini State of the State address, but I share with them where we are as it relates to our strategic plan goals, often highlight something that's happening in the district, and then also have an opportunity for that group to give input and some strategies and some reaction to our goals and to our progress. Getting close to the end here, I put this slide in here to show the board that there's a lot more going on in the district than just our work around our strategic plan, but particularly the grant work in Redford. And I'm going to pass out to the board members because I didn't actually have this at my access and my disposal. But this is some more information, if you can just take one, about our grant work. A lot of times when you have such heavy lifting to do in a district, the question becomes, how do you fund all of it? Like, how are you able to financially do some of the things that you're able to do? And we've been fortunate through a relationship and a partnership with Hanover Institute. I spoke about Hanover last time we were together. I do not have a grants department in Redford Union, but what I do have is a partnership with Hanover that does some of the grant working with us in collaboration. So if you turn into this document and the board looks at the very first page, you will see this is the work that we've done with Hanover Research, and they have helped us through 2016 either write these grants or move forward with a prospectus for financial funding. They've helped us do letters of request for funding, and you see on the next page outcomes, the amount of funding that we've received, as well as projects that we've completed with them. They've helped us with funding for our space flight program, which I shared with the board, that our middle school students will be taking a project to space at Cape Canaveral here in a couple of weeks. And they've been a real partner with us in helping us find ways to finance a lot of the initiatives that directly rely into our strategic plan. When you have a moment to digest this, you will see each thing that is listed in the project overview directly aligns with one of our strategic plan goals and opportunities. Finally, I just want to leave the board with who I am as a leader. I shared with you 2 quotes that are impactful to me as it relates to leadership, as it relates to sometimes having to make very tough decisions as a leader. And a lot of those decisions oftentimes are around fiscal responsibility. We are no short of having to make those tough decisions, as most districts do. One of the examples that I can give you is that last year, one of the revenue sources that we had in the district was a virtual program that was run by a third party in the district. I had to make the tough decision to end that relationship, not because of the program itself, but because of some concerns about the third party that was running this program for us. But we knew going into that decision that there was going to be a hit in our revenue from not being able to continue to run that program. But what was most important to me was the fidelity of the program, the quality of the program, and the management of the program. And so sometimes as a leader, you are asked to make those tough decisions that have physical, consequences. Also, some of the things that we've had to decide is looking at our school of choice and how our school of choice numbers impact our culture impact our climate, impact our building size, impact our class size. And we've been engaged for the last 2 years in a process of right-sizing the district, not just taking students in because we can, but taking students in so that the district is in a right size, right class size, right instructional balance. And it really has improved. My staff would tell you that last year was good, but this year was even better with the start of year because we've made some real strategic decisions about right-sizing the district. Of course, it comes with sometimes a reduction of staff, but those are the tough decisions that you have to make in order for the district to run at an optimal level. My last comment around making tough decisions is that my partner is a CPA, and he and I have done a presentation called Don't Unhitch the Wagon. And what the presentation is really about is decoupling, or the lack of decoupling, finances with achievement. Because oftentimes what happens is when districts are in a financial crisis, they cut, as Redford did. But then they don't have the resources that they need. They don't have the professional learning that they need. They don't have the curriculum that they need. They don't have the facilities that they need in order for them to be able to run a district and make a successful learning environment for students. So that is a delicate balance that we have been engaged in Redford. And it's one decision or the other, but the reality of the situation is you have to have quality programming. You have to have phenomenal teaching and learning. You have to have a culture of high expectations. You have to have order and safety in place in order for students to learn. And those are things that we have been focused on in our strategic plan in order to see the district grow and for student learning to improve. And then the last slide is something that's near and dear to me to leave the board with. And this is who I am as a leader, because it's about people first before it is about anything else. And I think I have a track record of putting people first and of understanding that relationships are what you really need to get the best out of people, to get the best out of stakeholders, and ultimately to get the best out of students. Thank you.
If you would like to be seated, that will probably be the best opportunity for you to relax a few minutes. We saved you a seat over here. And we will move to board questions. Mrs. Cummings? Oops. Should we wait just a second?
You there, Richard?
I am.
Okay, they're just about to start the questioning of the candidate.
Okay, thanks.
All right, Mrs. Cummings?
Hello again. You talked about programs that you've implemented in your current district. Have you had an opportunity to take a look at programs in Farmington or think about what you might recommend implementing in Farmington?
I have taken a look at programs in Farmington, and in addition to taking a look at them, I heard a lot of affirming things today about what I've read on paper and what I've had a chance to read on the website and see on Facebook, on the videos and things like that. So one of the things that comes out as a strength in this district is the opportunities for students. They are just across the board, from robotics to international baccalaureate to Leader in Me. A lot of fantastic work that's happening in the area of literacy. As I was walking in one of the buildings today, there were kids everywhere working with adults on sharpening their skills. And so you see it everywhere. You even hear in the stakeholders the value that they place in all of the programs and the opportunities. I can't say that there's anything that jumps out at me that I would actually change. But one of the things that I did hear is whether or not there's continuity from programs from building to building, from elementary to middle to high. Do we have a strong pipeline? Could we build a stronger pipeline, for instance, in the areas of STEAM? Those are the kinds of feedback that I received when I was listening to both students and staff, and some of the areas that I would focus.
Thank you.
Mr. Rich?
Yeah, so that I'm definitely looking at is looking at scale, and so the difference in size between Redford Union and Farmington Public Schools, and how you would be able to adjust to the full leadership role. I know with Washtenaw ISD,
Yep.
But with being the superintendent in a district like Farmington, how do you expect to be able to take on that size difference?
That's an excellent And you're right, you know, Washington, I had the capacity of working with 40,000 students spread over the 9 school districts, and also work with Livingston as well. So I definitely have the experiences of large, complex organizations from that perspective. Also in Southfield, which in size is very similar, you know, at the time to Farmington being the director of curriculum, I had a team that is probably 3 times as large as the team that I have now, that I had to hold the vision and also make sure that the work was done. But I wasn't the one that was doing the work day in and day out. I had to provide the leadership, the oversight, the accountability, and really help move the district along and have the narrative and the vision for where we were moving with teaching and learning in Southfield. I don't doubt that I would have the same sort of success that I've had in Southfield, that I've had in Washtenaw, that I've had in Redford here. I think the size just allows me to have more people, more hands, more people engaged in the work, more people to cultivate and build the consensus with, but I don't imagine that I would have any issue with the size whatsoever.
Mrs. Smith?
You specify who approached you to apply for the position, because you indicated a couple of times.
Richard lost connection. He's trying to get back on.
Mr. Manier's coming. I saw him.
Hello,
Hi, sorry about that.
that's okay, and can you mute when you're not speaking?
The button with the microphone.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to repeat the question. Can you specify who approached you to apply for this position? Because you indicated several times you were asked, and what was your reasoning for applying for this position? That's pretty much it.
Sure, excellent question. So I was approached by a parent in the community. I believe one of those parents actually spoke earlier this evening, which also was someone that I formerly worked with in another district. I was also contacted by MASB and asked would I consider the position. Was I interested? That my skill set and my experiences seemed to be a good match. A combination of those 2 conversations led me to say, let me take a deeper look at Farmington. And once I did take a deeper look at the district, looked at what was going on in the district, the strengths of the district, the opportunities in the district, as well as the expressed challenge in the district, I really felt like my skill set and my experiences were aligned.
Mrs. Weems?
Establishing a culture of excellence, including improving curriculum, teaching and administrative practices, building level supports, all of that. How would you go about doing that here at Farmington?
So I think one of the deeper in the data than I'm able to get from where I currently sit, because I obviously only have certain access to certain data as someone from the outside. Getting into the data will allow me to really see where the student achievement strengths lie, where the gaps really are, and then between looking at the data and hearing directly from stakeholders, students, staff, parents, be able to understand more deeply where's there a difference between the written and articulated vision of the district versus what's the lived experience of students in that district, and figure out how those gaps can be addressed through the curriculum, through instruction, through assessment. And most importantly, I think one of the things that stands out to me is really getting deeper into curriculum alignment in the district, really understanding what work has been done around curriculum. When I came into Redford, one of the things that I did right off the bat was a curriculum and instructional and professional learning assessment, because I wanted to know what staff felt were their strengths and what areas staff felt like they still had gaps in. What areas they had been professionally developed in most recently, and what areas they still felt like they needed growth in. And that really helped shape the initial curriculum development work that we began in the district. Another thing that I would take a look at is the National Clearinghouse data that tells us that after students leave Farmington, what they do. It's one thing to get students graduated from high school. It's another even to see them enter into post-secondary, but do they maintain in post-secondary, and do they actually graduate from either a 2-year or a 4-year university after they matriculate in. That data can sometimes be really telling about where some of our gaps lie, because oftentimes students get into college, but they don't actually graduate. And part of the reason that they don't graduate is that they're having to take on remedial classes because they weren't adequately prepared, even though we may feel like we're giving kids a real solid academic experience. They go into a more rigorous academic environment when they enter into post-secondary, and the scale-up economics don't allow them to stay because they're having to afford classes that really we can do a better job of preparing them before they leave us so that they can be more successful and actually graduate from post-secondary. So that would also be kind of information coming back to us that we could use to strengthen our academics and really speak to and inform the whole system, not just what's happening at the high school, but then also articulated from the high school back down to the middle school and from the middle school back down to the elementary.
Mr. Johnson?
Thank you. It was, nice to meet you. I'm sorry I was not here for the previous interview, so again, pleasure to meet you.
As well.
Dr. Shivers, give us a reason why we would not hire you. And let me put that in perspective.
Okay. That's an interesting question.
That's why I ask it. In every position, obviously, there has to be some type of growth. There's no such thing in my mind as a perfect person for a job because the job itself isn't perfect. So there are areas of growth that you need as well. What are those areas of growth? In other words, what are the things that Dr. Shivers or Shivers?
Yes, it's Shivers. You're
Thank you.
correct. Yes.
Thank you. What are the areas that Dr. Shivers needs to grow in order to step into a position like this?
Question.
That's why I ask it.
Yeah, I think as a leader, I think I'm a very thoughtful leader, and I think I'm a very driven leader, but I also think at times it's a pacing thing, right? And it's an understanding the community that you're in and what they're ready for and how much change they can take on, and then how you work through those things. I wouldn't really say that it's a growth, but I would say with every new challenge, I have to kind of revisit that, right? There is a difference between an adaptive issue that you need to tackle and a technical issue, and sometimes you can do one for the other, and you can approach what needs to be dealt with more adaptively by a technical fix, and it has unintended, consequences. So myself as a leader, moving into a new role, moving into a new position in a bigger district, it would really be just stepping back and pacing myself and understanding really deeply what the community needs. It was very easy to see coming into Redford Union, to be very quite honest with you, what the low-hanging fruit was, because there were so many things that needed to be addressed. Farmington has some solid data, and you have some phenomenal things going on in the district. So it's going to be important for me to just pace myself a little bit, right? And take some time to really get to know the community and really get to know what those areas of needs are before I address them.
Can I have a follow-up?
Sure.
Just as a follow-up, based upon the pacing that you're discussing, can you give me an example of a situation where pacing didn't work, or you went into something too soon or not soon enough in any of your previous jobs?
Well, I think a better way for me to describe it is that sometimes, as we have come up against issues and challenges in the district, I'm trying to think of, as you ask the question, a real concrete example, but I guess I would still go back to, there was so much that needed to be done.
Sure,
right? There were so many things, I could just, kind of rattle them off that needed to be done, that it really was not necessarily an issue of going too fast or doing too much. Is that, do you really have the mass of people with you? And that's sometimes very hard to have a good pulse on and engage. I don't think I would do anything differently, but I will tell you that as a result of me being a finalist, you know, a lot of people are concerned. A lot of people are really worried about what's the future, you know, of Redford Union. And myself as a leader, the reflection that I've had to have is that did I in part, was it too much of me and not enough of them? Does that make sense, right? You know,
I understand.
and whether or not the vision is being carried by me, and whether or not the vision is actually instilled in the community and can sustain itself beyond my leadership.
Thank you.
Mr. Monkmel?
Push the microphone button.
Yes, thank you.
Richard, we're around the same age, I get it.
Yes, and I am in an undisclosed location. Dr. Shivers, I was wondering if you've ever had to terminate the employment of an administrator. And if you have, can you share with us the circumstances and the process that you followed?
I have never had to terminate the, well, I was about to say that, but then that's not totally true. I had to terminate a program which by default it terminated the administrator that was leading the program. And the process started with complaints at multiple levels, at the ISD level, at the state level. So there was a lot of investigation that went into being able to determine whether there was validity to those complaints. Also, we needed to get stakeholder input, so we needed to hear from students and from parents. And once we shared with parents, because we put together a communication to let them know that we were doing an investigation because of the severity of the complaints, there were parents and students that were willing to step forward and share with us that information. There was a lot of triangulation of that information to see where there were points of intersection, and when there may have been some things that were maybe rumors or taken out of context. After all of that information was gathered and put together, myself did not conduct that investigation. My human resources and attorney conducted the investigation because it would have been slightly a conflict of interest for me to be engaged in every part of it. The recommendation then had to come to me, though, about the next steps. And once that recommendation came to me, I contacted Wayne Risa, who needed to be a part of the conversation. I also contacted the oversight for this program and administrator to have an emergency meeting. We had that meeting. It was open to the public. There was a hearing that also was open to the public. And then I deliberated, and the deliberation included me asking additional questions. And I am intentionally being somewhat vague because it may be still some litigation that is around this. But after all of that occurred, the program and the persons, because it was more than one, that was leading the program was let go of, effective immediately, and then communication was subsequently sent to all parties that were impacted about the reason why. And then we worked really hard over the next several months to make all affected parties whole, you know, by the process.
Okay, thank you.
It's hard to know which one to ask, so I'm going to. Over the past several years, Farmington Public Schools has made significant cuts in programs, supports, and resources as a result of lack of funding. It's projected that under the governor's proposed budget, Farmington Public Schools could be in a position to receive some additional funds. Our wish list is lofty. How would you approach considering which things to bring back or add if we had the opportunity? And how do you use program evaluation to determine that?
So program evaluation should be done no matter what, whether there's a financial question on the table or not, so that we have a good sense of what's working and what's not. so that at any given point in time when we need to make a decision about continuing or discontinuing a program, we have that data accessible to us. To get to the bigger part of the question, though, is about how those two kind of bar together. I think it really is being intentionally and focused on where there is a need and where there is a gap. So, for instance, one of the things that I heard as I visited throughout the district today was about the media. Uh-oh, I heard a groan out there. And about the desire, maybe the need to have more capacity there. And so that would be something like that would be, because it touches the kids, right? It impacts the kids. It's closer to the kids. So that would be something that you would really want to take a deep dive on, look at. And also learn from, because it's not just what's happening here, but what's happening across the state, across the country. We don't need to reinvent any wheels. We need to look at districts that look like us and what they do in the area of media and see if there's a way to kind of grow some capacity. For example, I'm not saying this would be the area that we would need to look at, but if it is an area that keeps coming up in stakeholder comments, then there's some traction that needs to be kind of further delved into. And so looking at how successful our current program and library and media experiences are and how we could build those to capacity would be an example. The other thing is that I really do believe that this is an area where we need to go slow to go fast. So just because we may have some money on the table doesn't mean that it's the time right now to make those kinds of decisions, especially with the new governor and with a kind of moving terrain, if you will, in the area of school aid in the state of Michigan. I would say let's move cautious and be conservative for a bit until we really understand what the priorities are of this current legislation, and also have some of the things that we need to work on internally strengthening themselves, like student enrollment, before we make some decisions to go after something lofty on that list.
Thank you. Mrs. Smith.
How would you work with the district's current CO cabinet, and are you willing to make changes if necessary? And how would you access each role and approach any necessary changes?
Okay, that's a mouthful. Okay. All right. So the first part of that question is that how would I go about working with the superintendent's cabinet, the ones closest to you? Again, I have in every position that I've gone into inherited a team. And sometimes just the dynamics of everybody on the team is a really good fit, and sometimes the dynamics or the skill set or the needs are not a really good fit. But you don't know that right away. So I certainly wouldn't go into the door, making any sort of changes. It would take some time, probably a year plus, for me to really know people. Now, if there's something that's hugely dysfunctional happening, that's a whole other category. That goes back to the question that he asked me about, removing someone when there's something that's happening that simply shouldn't be happening, and you've tried to correct it, right? You've tried to work through the proper channels to change the direction of what's happening, or give the person or persons opportunities for growth, to work better on the team, to be more supportive of one another, whatever those issues are. And if it's just not working and it's impacting then the culture and the climate and ultimately then impacting students, that is something that we would have to look at as making a change. But it's certainly not something that any real strong leader would come in the door and just change automatically. It's something that you would spend time really getting to know the people. And to be very honest, I have seen people that don't work well under one leader work really well under another. So you would have to take time to really understand that before you make that decision.
Thank you.
Mr. Roach.
To defer, I find the board to be pretty agreeable. Have you found yourself in a disagreement with a board member on a specific issue or the board as a whole? How would you proceed?
You know what? That I've been in Redford, I have been fortunate where that has not happened to the degree in which it's become an issue. Of course, we've had, areas that we don't see eye to eye on because we're all, different individuals and we have different experiences and things like that, but we usually can talk through and come to consensus and come to an agreement. I was actually trying to calculate in my head how many times I've actually gotten a no vote from the, board through consensus, and it's been very, very few times. Part of the reason is because I work really hard at building relationships with board members, and I work really hard at communicating with board members well in advance to a decision having to come to the table, so that when the decision does come to the table, the board members are educated, they know why the rationale for what is being asked. We have worked through either individually or collectively whatever issues or concerns may be there. And it really has just led to a very positive relationship with every one of my board members. But if I was to find myself in an issue of disagreement with a board member, I would just simply ask for that board member and I to be able to sit down and really talk through what that issue and what that concern is. We'll find out what they need from me, right? Okay, and then me be able to articulate what I need from them so that we can move the issue forward and together, because everybody's heart is in the right place. We just may be attacking the issue a little bit differently, but we have a job to do. We have a responsibility that the stakeholders are looking for us to do collectively, and so my goal is going to be always to come to that collective decision making to move the district forward.
Thank you.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes. You stated a couple minutes ago, and one of, I'm not sure if it was my question or someone else's, but you said, you know, if I can get the masses, you know, if the masses are behind me. What if what you're doing is, let's say, the right thing to do and the masses aren't necessarily with you? How do you deal with that? You understand my question?
I do understand your question,
Okay.
and my experience has been it's not been that blatant, okay? Meaning that I have not been moving ahead of and forward, and then the masses are just like, we're going this way, right? That hasn't happened to me. What I've more often experienced, if any, and probably I would say a couple of times I experienced, is that they articulate that they're behind me, right? That they articulate we're all moving in the right direction, but change is hard. And along with change comes a sense of loss. And once that sense of loss kicks in, people start reevaluating how well they are behind you. And you realize that, wait a minute, I had 100 people and now my 100 is down to 60, and then now my 60 is down to 40. And it just doesn't happen, at least my experience hasn't been that it's just happened like immediately. It's been kind of over time, right? So what that responsibility that I have as a leader is to be aware of that and be cognizant of that, and try to get up underneath why it's happening. Sometimes it's simply because I did not do enough capacity building before we move forward, okay? Other times it's because I haven't attended to the loss piece, the people part of it, the hurt that, comes along with it. And then sometimes it's not doing enough education as well as hand-holding with people as we move forward. The bottom line is that if you are good at articulating what the vision is, and people know your heart is in the right place, and that you're working for the good of the whole, you usually can get people to follow you and be willing to work with you, because not only do they know that you're working for the right things and you're leading them in the right direction, but they also know that you're the type of person that will not always lead, but that sometimes you're willing to follow as well. And they respect you for that, because you're not always the one that's having to make all the decisions and not always the one having to do all the leading.
Thank you.
Mrs. Cummings?
Do you have any ideas on how to address the needs for all students in the district? I know you had an opportunity today to meet with different stakeholders, and as you may have experienced, different stakeholders have different views and different perspectives as to what's important for their child or their students or the community. How do you address that, and how do you grow and support all students?
So it did come up in several different ways, and you said that very beautifully, because it looks different for different people. In some cases, it's perception, and what I mean by that is I've looked at your data. Your data is solid in many areas in this district, something the district really needs to be proud of and celebrate. You have solid data across your subgroups, and even though you have a gap, you do have an achievement gap, you still outperform your peers even in that area. And so that story has to be told, so just people have a good communication and good understanding about what your data actually says. But then the other piece of that is really helping, the entire community see what is inherent in those gaps and why those gaps may actually exist. One of the examples that I gave earlier today, after I was asked a question, I don't think I shared that with you all, but one of the high school students asked me a question about being a woman and being an African-American woman, how have I been marginalized? And how would I keep that marginalization from not happening in the district? I was like, where did these kids come from? Right? You know, because it was a phenomenal question that they had actually given some thought to. And so what I shared with them is that sometimes that's subtle and sometimes it's explicit, right? And so if we're talking about moving all kids, we have to be willing to deal with the explicit marginalization. For example, kids not being put in honors classes, culture of low expectation, students not given the same opportunities as their peers, right? But then, and that's easy to spot, right, when that's happening. It's the more subtle forms of marginalization that are harder to kind of unearth and harder to tackle. But the data will tell you that if you're willing to get into the data and let the data tell the story, it will tell us what those areas are that we need to focus on and improve. I shared with one of the groups today that one of the school districts that I work with, not my current district, but one of my previous districts, the longer that you were in that district in math, if you were African American male, the lower you performed. The longer you were in that district, if you were African American male, the lower you performed. That went completely against community perception. They felt like the students that were low performing were students that were coming from the outside in the district. So what that data told us was that there was a systemic, and a culture problem in that district, and we needed to get to the bottom of understanding what it was really about. At the end of the day, the best way that I could frame it, it was a culture of low expectations. And so we had to start tracking the data. We had to start making sure that students were put into the more rigorous classes regardless of the color of their skin. And we had whole teachers and then subsequently administrators responsible for making sure that equity was alive and well in the classroom. Thank you.
Mr. Muckmo?
So there's an increasing awareness at the state level of the importance of attending to social and emotional needs of our students at all ages. And I'm wondering how you've dealt with students that have social, emotional, or mental health challenges when there aren't additional financial resources available. And how did you support teachers in dealing with it?
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but this is an area that I'm particularly passionate about, so I'm going to answer your question in a couple of ways. When I first entered the district, one of the very first things that we did is we provide trauma-informed professional learning for a cohort of educators. This is actually how we got involved in the restorative practices work. So even though I came into the district being a leader in restorative practices, it really was through focusing on trauma and what happens to students as a result of trauma that led to us looking at restorative practices as a healthy way to heal students that have been through multiple things in their life that then led to them acting out or having emotional challenges in the school. The other thing that really has, I think, led to this conversation around social and emotional learning is thinking about things outside of teaching and learning that help form and shape our students, like, for example, the performing arts, athletics, those opportunities that really give students experience and confidence and success outside of the academics can sometimes help a student who is dealing with some struggles, dealing with some challenges, doesn't fit in, have challenges in their personal life. Just like Farmington, Redford's population of students that are homeless has greatly increased every single year. And so we just find more and more students that are coming from an element of high risk, coming from an element of dysfunction and brokenness that really need our help and our support for them to get back on track. We service a large population of students that come to us from foster care, and oftentimes those students, they have dealt with seeing family members be traumatically injured, if not worse. They themselves have suffered a great deal of abuse. And so we've done and still need to do a tremendous amount of work around a social and emotional learning, but it's something that we take very seriously in the district. and we tackle it in all different kinds of ways. At Tier 1, we tackle it PBIS, right? So what we're doing for all kids. At the more higher levels, we tackle it, as I shared with you earlier, through programs like our Second Chance program, where we provide kind of wraparound support as an alternative to suspension or expulsion for students. And in that program, if you were to visit our Second Chance program, you'll see kids doing yoga. You'll see kids meditating, because we understand that oftentimes they need to have ability to reset themselves. And that inability to reset themselves and de-escalate is what leads to a lot of the discipline and a lot of the very severe behaviors that we see in school.
Mrs. Williams? Okay. Dr. Shivers, we have an incredibly talented group of educators and staff members who dedicate themselves to our students and are lifelong learners. However, some of the common messages over the last couple of years have been, I don't feel valued. I can't trust anyone. I'm afraid. I'm afraid to speak up for fearing that I'm going to lose my job. I don't think anyone really cares about what I have to say. My voice isn't valued. I'm just exhausted. How many more years till retirement? So how would you determine the foundation of these comments and determine which of these comments we own as a system versus what's in the profession and happening outside of our control? And then how would we go about turning these comments into positives?
Sure. And you framed it because there is a reality that outside of Farmington, outside of Michigan, public education just is taking a beating, right? You know, nationally, that's just something that we've struggled with as educators. So there's a little bit of that, you know, that is definitely a part of it. But I did hear a lot of those themes today as I met with, you know, staff members, and there's definitely a need for healing. People feel wounded for a variety of reasons. It may be perception, it may be reality, but if it's perception, to me, it's reality, right? Because they're living through that. And so one of my responses when that question came up today was that I think, and I believe, and I hope that some of my people here that would agree, that I model that. Meaning I model for people that important part of relationships, the important part of transparency, the important parts of being open and being honest, being willing to dialogue about things and really have tough conversations, even if it's uncomfortable. I don't shy away from those kind of conversations. So if I have a building administrator or a central office administrator that is challenged by something, I will give it a space for maybe 24 hours, and then I want to sit down and talk so that we can work through and hash those things. Because I model that and did a book study even with my staff about having my administrative team about having hard conversations, I hope that me modeling that gives them the tools and the resources for them to be able to do it themselves. And some of them are really good at it, and some of them need additional support, but it is an expectation. What I have found by doing that is that it creates an environment where people feel like they can trust you, that even if they've made a mistake, even if they didn't handle something the right way, they can come to you and be honest and be transparent about how that was handled, and you can work through those differences and those discrepancies as they occur. The last thing that I will say to you is that I shared with the group that every other year that I've been in Redford, I do something that's called one-on-ones, and I plot myself in a building all day, and in 15-minute increments from the beginning of the day to the end of the day, I let anybody come talk to me about anything. Secretaries, teachers, custodians, aides, whoever. Oftentimes people will tell me it's the first time that they've ever sat down and had a one-on-one with the superintendent. 15 minutes might not sound like a lot of time, but trust me, boy, do I get an earful during those 15 minutes. And I can start to hear trends, and I can start to see patterns in some of the things. Some things that people want to come and tell me are just small, you know, obstacles that they've had. But sometimes they have a long list of real important challenges that they're dealing with. And those things also help build relationships and repair relationships when people need to heal.
So I'm going to just ask one quick follow-up. How do you take what you're doing now and move that into a system the size of Farmington?
To that.
Okay.
It would just take me longer. Instead of 1 week, it would take me 3 weeks, right? But I would still put myself in, you know, the buildings and be accessible to staff, because just like today, really hearing from people that are in the trenches is the only way that you really know what's going on.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mrs. Wing?
I've got a two-part question. So, we're looking for a leader who thinks strategically and is working towards inspiring us all towards a longer-term vision. Given what you know about Farmington Public Schools, I realize you've had a short amount of time to digest, but is your thinking initially that we're working towards maintaining all of the great things that make us a great district, or is it more in the space of being more transformational? Is the first part of the question.
Okay.
And then the second part is, how would you go about developing strategies to achieve the vision?
I'm gonna say the first part of that question is really a both. It depends on what area it is. There are definitely some areas that have just been constant themes, whether it was the parent group, whether the student group, whether it was the teacher group, and some of it goes to culture and climate and just how people feel in the district that need to be transformed, right? Like, we just need to really think differently about how we express the value that, you know, people have in the district. And one of the things that I kind of heard over and over again is accessibility, approachability, transparency, relationships, that sort of thing. That would be more transformational to me in terms of overhauling those things. But I'm going to say, again, that there are some really strong things that are happening in this district that don't need a total overhaul, right? They just need to be maybe refined, okay? They need to be thought through maybe a slightly differently. They need to be expanded, and one of the examples that I gave earlier is just, you know, program connectivity from one building to the other. And those things don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? They just take what's there and build on it and make it stronger and maybe rethink parts of it in order for it to expand. And then the second part of that question, ask it again.
How would you go about developing strategies to
I wouldn't do it in a vacuum, but I did hear some of that today, that there was a feeling, and I don't know how real it is, that some of the strategic things were created in a vacuum, so I wouldn't do it in a vacuum. I would definitely include all of the people in the roles and responsibilities that I met today as part of that conversation, under the leadership and the guidance and the governance of the board, to really be able to take all of what you guys have asked me, to be honest with you, and look at our current strategic goals, look at our current data, look at our other areas of operation, whether it be transportation, whether it be finance, whether it be facilities, and really make a decision about where we're going and where we need to continue to grow and improve in.
Thank you. Mr. Rich?
What are your thoughts on privatization, from custodial services to busing?
I was asked that question earlier as well. I probably gave like a real political answer, because I really don't know where the district has been or where the district is going with that area. But my personal opinion is that the people that are working the closest to the students really need to be employees of the district. So the question was asked to me about, would I privatize transportation? I certainly would never say never, but I would also say that transportation, those bus drivers are extremely important, because they handle the drop off and the pickup. And if you know anything about transportation, which I do, the relationship that bus drivers have with kids and with families can be critical to the culture and climate of what's happening in that building, and then vice versa, whatever is happening on the bus can be critical in terms of shared back with the home to really create that continuity. Bus drivers become the eyes and the ears of the community and the neighborhood. And sometimes, I can't say this is a definite all the time, but my experience has been when they are not employees of the district, there's just a natural disconnect. They don't feel that responsibility, that connectivity, and that relationship to be a part of the whole day experience of a child. So I would never say never, but that would be an example of that I would hope would be the very last area that we would consider making that decision. But as I also shared with the group, because I want to be really, really honest and transparent with this answer, is that if it becomes down to a decision of removing teachers out of a classroom that would increase our class size or drastically change the culture in the building, and we could save 5 teachers, for example, by looking at privatizing a group, it certainly would be something that I would want to do a deep dive of research and studying in before we take it off of the table.
Okay. Okay. Mr. Monk, another question?
Yes. I'd like to know is what actions you've taken in your school district to address the achievement gap, and would you do the same thing in Farmington?
I shared some of the things in my presentation earlier today, and to be very honest with you, we have not addressed the achievement gap from a teaching and learning perspective as much as we've addressed it in the other areas that impact teaching and learning. So like Farmington, we've dealt with disproportionality, we've dealt with the overrepresentation of our students receiving suspensions and expulsions. We've seen an increase in students that have been referred to for special education. And our goal has really been to focus on tier 1 instruction. And I stress that because that is where we have the biggest weakness in the district, is really what's happening for all kids in the classroom. If you don't get that right, you will take a gap that will exist and make it bigger and bigger and bigger by not addressing what's happening and what the opportunities are, what the curriculum is, what the instruction is provided for students, what the expectations are around how students are assessed. All of those things will be negatively impacted if you don't deal with that first issue. So we've spent a lot of our time really closing that gap in the area of attendance, closing that gap in the area of suspensions and expulsions so that we can get to the area of teaching and learning.
Mr. Johnson?
Thank you. Dr. Shivers, what do you believe is the biggest problem that Farmington Public Schools faces today, and what would you do to correct it or place it on course for correction?
So we share two that came up today, and then one that I thought of coming into today. There is a perception that race relations in the district are at a critical, pivotal point. And that's something that has to be dealt with. That just becomes greater and deeper if it is not dealt with. It is probably one of most uncomfortable processes to get you there as a district, but we simply just know that it won't go away. And anytime anything else happens, it'll just make that gap in that wound bigger and bigger. So that has to be dealt with. I don't know, because I'm not in the district, what's real and what's not. You read in the media, and what I know firsthand is the media does not get stuff right, So I don't necessarily know, digging into it, what's true and what's not true. But at least from a perception, there is some marginalization that's happening. There's some really explicit race things that have occurred, and those things have to be tackled and dealt with. And as uncomfortable as it must be, everybody has to be willing to be a part of that process. The second thing that came up today is obviously the transition of going from 3 high schools down to 2 high schools. Not a lot of major things, but change is hard. I already talked about that, right? So there's a sense of loss, there's a sense of impending doom, and not necessarily knowing what to expect and what not to expect, but there's also great hope and possibility, excitement, so it's a little bit of both, right? There's an anxiousness of not knowing what that means. For example, the high schooler said to me, this came from the students, what will you do if there's 2 people that have the exact same GPA and they both should be valedictorian? They didn't use those words, but that's what they meant, right? And so I said we may have a year or 2 of transition, right? We may have a year where there's multiple people at multiple positions in order to get to that next step. But that's what's on the mind of the kids, right? They want to keep a sense of identity as well as merging into this, new high school. And I'm sure their parents feel the same way, and I'm sure staff feels the same way. So dealing with that part of it would be the second thing that I would tell you that is kind of things that need to be dealt with, right away. The last one that I will mention, just coming into today, looking at your data, is that you have a very seasoned teaching population. Notice I used the word seasoned. Teaching population. And what that means is that a lot of institutional memory will be leaving out of the door of this district in like 5 to 10 years. And the leaders in this district have to be intentional about how we let that happen, because otherwise you are going to be vacated with the foundation of who this district is and how it became to be gone. And what's going to be behind it is novice teachers. And there are some benefits, right, to having, a younger teaching force from a perspective of, and I don't mean younger in age, I mean in terms of their experience, right, because of what they bring to the table and the cost, right, where your 85% of your costs are in that area. So there's obviously some benefit to a novice workforce. but you lose that institutional memory. You lose master teachers at every level. And we have to be intentional and think outside the box about how we capture that, because there's two real big problems that we have. One, no one's going into teaching and learning. I teach at Eastern, and I will tell you that those class sizes have gotten smaller and smaller and smaller. And so we have
Sorry, you teach where?
at Eastern.
Okay.
I teach pre-service teachers at Eastern. I teach an assessment and evaluation class a semester before they become an educator.
Okay.
And that pool has just gotten smaller and smaller and smaller. So that's the first problem. But the second problem, which is even worse than the first problem, is even if they go into teaching, they're not staying. So not only are you going to get a young workforce, but you're going to get a workforce that's only going to commit to you for like about 3 to 5 years. So this district really has to pay attention to that, because if you don't pay attention to it, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, we're going to be looking at a very, very different district from the perspective of teaching and learning.
Thank you.
Dr. Shivers, talk to us about experiences with an approach to ensuring a safe learning environment for students.
So I know from sharing my information with you all, you know that I've spent a lot of time in this area. Unfortunately, out of tragedies that have occurred in schools, so some of the more really severe things I've been involved in post Sandy Hook, I just by happenstance ended up getting involved in working with the Washington County Sheriff's Department, and myself became a national active shooter trainer, and so I've done that training all around the country. And I believe that I am looked to in the state and certainly in the region as being a leader in school safety, as being a leader in preparation and being proactive around school threats. When I was in Washtenaw, I helped write a $250,000 grant that was put safety mechanisms in all schools in Washtenaw County. I've worked with the MSP, the Michigan State Police. I've worked at the state level in developing the protocol and the foundation for emergency operational plans. We've rehauled our emergency operational plans in Redford Union. I've shared that information at the county level with the superintendents in Wayne County. I've been called on other superintendents to help them with their risk management, with their safety and their security. One of the things that I paid attention to as I visited all of your buildings was your visitor management system and how that's handled in the buildings. So I have a lot of experience in this area. Unfortunately, I've had a lot of experience in this area, but it is also an area that makes the community feel safe and secure if it's done well.
Thank you. Mrs. Cummings will be on the board, and we'll move to public questions.
Thank you. Yeah, actually, your answer to, I think it was Mr. Johnson's question, kind of jarred my memory here, and I see in your resume that you're an adjunct professor at Madonna University, and it looks like very recently,
I
from
am,
January to
yes.
the present. I, too, am an employee of Madonna University, and I just, for the board, want the board and the community to know that I think the first time I ever met you was the first time you were here
That is true.
interviewing. We
Yes.
don't know each other. I've
is true.
never seen you on campus.
Never seen her before, no, I'm just kidding.
We work
No.
we work in different colleges,
Yes.
so I just, that
I appreciate
jogged
that.
my memory, and I just wanted everyone to know that, yes, although we are employees of the same university, it's actually very recent employment for you.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you for your service to the university. I appreciate that. But, beyond that, we don't have a connection.
But there is another Farmington connection. Michelle Harmala is the one that recruited me
Yes.
to teach in the doctoral clerk, and I believe she is one center. So.
Yes, and I think she was an employee before I was on
Uh-huh.
the board.
She
So,
was.
yeah.
I guess
and-
I should also say that also work
Oh.
but
I didn't know that
ran
either.
across
Yeah.
you and we're not on the same path.
Well, I haven't
could-
taught in a couple of years, so that's good, right?
Can I say one thing?
Oh, no.
Just so everybody's clear, and I did
You
not
don't
ask
work at Eastern.
Dr. Herrera this question. He and I were at Michigan State at the same time. I do not know him. There are 40,000 plus students. Obviously, he's much smarter than me because he was like a biology something or other, and that was not my undergrad major. So just want to make sure that comes out as well. But you and I were there at the same, no.
No, it wasn't the same time. But yeah, I mean, I have a graduate degree from Michigan State, but.
Where?
Michigan State
There
University.
you go.
But no, I do not know Dr. Herrera beyond the interviewing process.
Thank you. We're going to move into the public questions. Some will be faster than others. If you need me to repeat anything, please feel free to ask me. The first one is, how do we hold administration and school staff accountable for implementing and following district policy, and how do you implement consistent consequences for violations?
Well, the first is have an expectation that people follow it. And when they don't, be willing to deal with it, call it out. I don't think that anybody that works with me would tell you that I have an issue handling and dealing with when things are not happening the way that they should. But I'm also a very patient leader. I'm also a leader that's going to take time to help develop. But if that's not working, then we have to move on to the next level of intervention. Maybe it's putting an administrator on an individual improvement plan, giving them an opportunity to really work specifically on a couple of skills and strategies. I have worked to get a mentor, outside mentor for an administrator if that's what they need in order for them to make the expected performance growth. And if none of those things are moving us in the right direction, then I would move to removing the administrator from that position if it was warranted. But I have not experienced that, partly because I think it really doesn't take, unless someone is just the wrong fit, for you to move through all of those levels of discipline if you are willing to work with someone until they improve. Again, I have heard and have directly experienced myself where someone doesn't perform well under one leadership, under one leader, and it is improved under another. But if it isn't, I am not afraid of and will deal with it accordingly.
Thank you. How do you plan diversity, inclusion, and understanding among all levels of employees and staff?
Can you repeat that one for me?
Sure. How do you plan to ensure diversity, inclusion, and understanding among all levels of employees and staff?
It came up earlier today, but it was framed a little bit differently. And one of the things that I said that makes that work tough is that you have to deal with yourself first. Diversity, inclusion, equity work, social justice work really starts with understanding who you are and what inherent biases that you bring to a situation, into in this case, the learning environment, and really unpack that. It's not an easy process. It is not a quick process, because you have to shift people's premises and beliefs, maybe long-held values and understanding. And even if you can't change any of those things, you have to get people willing to put kids first, whether or not they can connect with and understand the differences with kids, and be really intentional about doing that work. And it also has to be where it's all or nothing, meaning it can't be some people wanting to engage in that work. That just won't work. It has to be everyone willing to engage in that work, because otherwise you have the people that are passionate about the work, involved in the work, and the people that are not all that interested in the work, not engaged in the work, and you still have the same problem exist. So I think you create a culture. I would hope that the board would all go through that work together. I would hope that parents in the community would go through that work. I would hope people that are not employees in the district, but that work with the district, would go through that work in the community. I would hope people that are not in the professional educator seat in the community, in the district, would go through that work. I know students are already engaged in that work, but I hope that they would also go through that work side by side with all of the different groups, because it is going to be a heavy lifting of the community and not just the school. And the last thing that I want to say is that I've heard, so much about the different things that have happened or have been suggested that have happened in the community. And the reality is that schools usually take on what's ever also happening in the broader community. So we can't deal with the issue of, if there is an inherent issue of race and culture in this community, we can't deal with it in a vacuum and just in the school. The whole community has to be willing to be a part of that conversation and that work together.
Thank you. What do you expect from the community and parent groups within Farmington Public Schools?
Cooperation, partnership, relationships, involvement, be willing to, before assumptions are made, I have an open door, policy, and I'm willing to sit down and talk to parents and community members whenever, they want to be heard. Oftentimes, They just simply want to be heard and feel like whatever their concerns are, there's a voice to it and that they're being listened to. So I would expect them to use all of those avenues, and when we call on them to be a part of things, that they're a part of it. And when they have questions and concerns with the district, they voice them. But ultimately, they're willing to, whether they have kids in the district or not, they're willing to work together.
Thank you. What are your plans for engagement in education?
It's kind of very simple, first question. And it did come up earlier today about what we do, the opposite of that, when families just simply won't engage. And so what I will say is that we have to put in place all of the things that would engage family. Food works. Having kids do some sort of performance works. If you need parents in to provide information, coupling that with something where their kids are involved in really gets parents to be, involved. But then we also have to be willing to do the hard work even if we can't get parents engaged and involved with. Not to exclude them from the process because they are our partners and they are their children's first educators, but understanding that some kids may not have that support. And we still have to educate them, despite that. And so working really hard to build that relationship, to communicate with parents. When I was a building principal, my expectation with teachers was 100% parent-teacher conferences. And I still have that expectation that we're doing whatever we can to connect with parents, even if they can't physically come in. This day and time, we can FaceTime them. We can, call them. We can go and meet them, maybe at a coffee shop or things like that, and just be creative and innovative about how we reach out to parents. And understand how we might define parent involvement may be different than their form of parent involvement, but it's still parent involvement.
What do you hope you accomplished at Redford if you leave now?
Ask that question.
What do you hope you accomplished at Redford if you leave now?
Hope. I entered into a district where that had been fractured, where there was a lot of we can't or we won't or we shouldn't. I think I shared with the board when I came into Redford, our neighboring school district was looking at annexing, our district, and so that really wounded people. A lot of the healing that I've talked about here needed to happen in Redford. And I firmly believe that the district is at a point and the stakeholders in the district at a point where not only is there hope, but they've actually seen what they can do, and they believe that they can keep moving forward no matter who's leading them.
Thank you.
Madam President, we probably have time for just one more.
Oh, man. Farmington Public School has 8 K-5 schools whose MSTEP performance varies from the 10th to the 70th percentile in the state. What would you do to reduce the variation between buildings?
Well, first of all, I would want to know what's different about all of the variables between the buildings that are at the 10th and the building with the 70th. Is it demographics? Is it programming? Is it staffing? It's not quick to unpack that, but those are some of the things that I would look at to be really able to understand what's happening. Has there been massive changes in the building? I know from looking at your scores, for example, there's something going on at the 6th grade. I'm not quite sure what that is. That would be another example of where I'd have to dig in deep to kind of look at that disparity. There's a lot of solid growth in 4th grade, for example, solid growth in 11th grade, but what's happening at 6th grade, for an example of where you see some disparities in the district. I can't see that kind of data from where I sit, but I would want to break down by subgroups, boys, girls, ethnic groups, free and reduced lunch, whether it's ELL population, other demographic groups, and really kind of understand what that data is telling us, and then look at programs. Just a real quick, because I know we're running out of time. When you do that work, and I call it data dive or data days, when you do that work and you go deep in the data, sometimes it's real clear. We're doing all of these initiatives in math, and we're doing only a few over here in literacy. Sometimes it's just we need to ratchet up the things that we're doing in both areas to get the same results. But sometimes it's much more complex work that needs to be done in order to raise student achievement.
Thank you so much. We conclude our questions for the evening. Thank you for your time, your commitment, for coming out to this process, sharing your day with our students and our staff and our community members to see what we are all very proud of, and we look forward to continued conversations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate each one of you. You've taken your time. This is very tough work, and I congratulate you on what you've done so far and wish you all luck in your decision.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, we will take a 30-minute recess, which will allow us to read through all stakeholder feedback and before we come back for deliberations. That's correct. If you are watching from home and you need to submit feedback, please do that exponentially. If you are in the audience, please make sure that you give it to one of our representatives from MASB so that we have access to that. At this point, we are in a 30-minute recess.